Our book club selection today is the brand new book from Dar Jamail, The End of Ice, Bearing Witness and Finding Meaning in the Path of Climate Disruption. The dedication of the book, this book is dedicated to the future generations of all species. Know that there were many of us who did what we could. This is from the introduction. The fall lasts long enough that I have time to watch the blue ice race upward, eons of time compressed into glacial ice, flashing by in fractions of seconds. I assume I've fallen far enough that I've pulled my climbing partner, Sean, into the crevasse with me. This is what it's like to die in the mountains, a voice in my head tells me. Just as my mind completes that thought, the rope wrenches my climbing harness up. I bounce languidly up and down as the dynamic physics inherent in the rope play themselves out. Somehow, Sean has checked my fall while still on the surface of the glacier. I brush the snow and chunks of ice from my hair, arms, and chest and pull down the sleeves of my shirt. Finding my glacier glasses hanging from the pocket of my climbing bib, I tuck them away. I check myself for injuries and incredibly find none. Assessing my situation, I find there's no ice shelf nearby to ease the tension from the rope, so Sean can begin setting up a pulley system to extract me. I look down, nothing but blackness. I look at the wall of blue ice directly in front of me, take a deep breath, and peer up into the tiny hole into which I'd fallen when I'd punched through the snow bridge spanning the crevasse. The same bridge Sean had crossed without incident as we made our way up Alaska's Matanuska Glacier toward Mount Marcus Baker in the Chugach Range. You get to look down one more time, then that's it, I tell myself out loud. Again, there's only a black and void yawning beneath me, swallowing everything, even sound. My stomach clenches. I remind myself to breathe. Sean, are you okay? I yell as I clamp my mechanical ascenders to the rope in preparation to climb up. Yeah, I'm all right, but I'm right on the edge, he calls back. I can't set an anchor to get out of the system, so don't ascend. We're going to have to wait for the other guys to catch up. Time passes. The onset of hyperthermia means I can't control my body from periodically shaking. To ignore my fear of dying, I gaze meditatively at the ice a few feet in front of me as I dangle. The miniature air pockets found in the whiter ice near the top of the glacier have long since been compressed, producing the mesmerizing beauty of centuries-old turquoise ice. Slightly deeper into the crevasse is ice that has been there since long before the Neanderthals. I hang suspended in silence, mindful not to move out of fear of dislodging Sean. Giving my full attention to the ice immediately within my vision, I focus on how the gently refracting light from above seems to penetrate and reflect off the perfectly smooth wall. Staring into it, the blue seems infinite. Despite the danger of my situation, the glacier's beauty calms me. Delicate snowflakes and their infinite possibilities of form land on mountainous terrain. Under its own weight, the snow is compressed into glaciers that scour and shape the face of the earth. Countless millions of tons of weight, aided by the force of gravity, push and pull these frozen rivers downhill, carving out cirques and troughs from uplifted geologic plates and sculpting the majestic heights of mountains that I have been drawn to since I was young. Eventually, our other two teammates arrive and work to extract Sean from his perch just 6 inches from the edge of the crevasse. All three of them set up a three-way pulley system. Laboriously, my teammates begin to haul me up, inches at a time, out of what nearly became my tomb. I continue to focus on the delicately shifting blades of blue in the ice as I draw closer to the surface, mesmerized by its raw beauty. My teammates pull me up to the lip of the crevasse. I repeatedly plunge the pick of my ice axe into the snow and haul myself out, never before as grateful for being on top of a glacier. I stand and gaze up at the mountain to the west, behind which the sun has just set. Snow plumes stream off one of its ridges, turned into ruddy red ribbons by the setting snow. Snowflakes flicker as they float into space. As relief floods my shivering body, I roar in gratitude and relief. Utterly overwhelmed by being alive and surrounded by the beauty of the mountain world, I hug each of my 3 climbing partners. Now safe, it sinks in how close to death I've been. That was Earth Day 2003. In hindsight, I believe the emotion I felt then stemmed in part from something else, a deeper consciousness that the ice that I had seen, which had existed for eons, was vanishing. 7 years of climbing in Alaska had provided me with a front row seat from where I could witness the dramatic impact of human-caused climate disruption. Each year we found the toe of the glacier had shriveled further. Each year for the annual early ice season festival on this glacier, we found ourselves hiking further up the crusty frozen mud left behind by rapidly retreating terminus. Each year the parking lot was moved closer to the glacier, only to be left further away as the ice withdrew. Even sections of Denali, which stands over 20,000 feet tall and is roughly 250 miles from the Arctic Circle, had undergone startling changes. The ice of its glaciers was disappearing quickly. Our planet is rapidly changing, and what we are witnessing is unlike anything that has occurred in nature or even geologic history. The heat-trapping nature of carbon dioxide and methane, both greenhouse gases, has been scientific fact for decades, and according to NASA, there is no question that increased levels of greenhouse gases must cause the Earth to warm in response. Evidence shows the greenhouse gas emissions are causing the Earth to warm 10 times faster than it should. And the ramifications of this are being felt quite literally throughout the entire biosphere. And then, he goes on, oceans are warming, etc. The End of Ice by Dar Jamail. You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, and it's midweek, so Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. Pocan.house.gov is his website, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
So glad to have you with us. And the phone number, by the way, is 202-808-9925 if you want to talk with Congressman Pocan. So last night we watched, I tweeted about this. I said basically Trump just launched his 2020 re-election campaign with essentially the same speech that he gave in 2015 when he came down the elevator at Trump Tower, and the networks paid for it. What do you think?
Yeah, he did what I think many of us thought he was going to, just put a bunch of misinformation that he's been putting out now for several years about the wall and trying to strike fear in the hearts of Americans. And luckily he did it in 9 minutes as opposed to a half hour, because I think the rhetoric could have really got going. But, he just put a lot of misinformation about the types of arrests, about whose fault it is for the shutdown, about drugs coming across the border, all the sort of old familiar refrains that we've heard, but what he's done so well at his rallies around the country. So clearly this is Donald Trump continuing to stick to his message that worked for him once. But I was glad that we were able to respond and actually point out the inaccuracies of Mexico paying for the wall and a lot of the other things that he said, why this isn't necessary.
Yeah, yeah. Although Chuck and Nancy looked like they were in a hostage situation. I mean, it's boy.
They probably felt like they were, actually.
Yeah, no doubt. Bernie also gave a rebuttal last night, which was pretty amazing. And then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was on Rachel Maddow's show, and she flamed out at Trump. One of the things I thought was most interesting, Congressman, was that on Fox News, they had Chris Wallace and Shepard Smith, as far as I can tell, the only two actual journalists who are on that so-called news network. And they basically, I watched the clip of it this morning, they basically took Trump apart. They said, this is all lies. They didn't use the word lies, but it was obvious. They said, this isn't true, this isn't true, this is an exaggeration, this lacks context. That was astonishing to me. Does that mean that, well, what does that mean? I mean, is it that Trump's shtick is growing thin with his base, or does it mean that the oligarchs, including Rupert Murdoch, have decided that, this guy's going down and we're not going to go down with him? Or is that just, has Fox done that before? This is, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time that immediately following a Trump speech or anything like that, they've fact-checked him.
Yeah, so those two journalists, as you said, are a few of the only journalists that actually are on Fox, have actually called him out previously on some items. So, the fact that they're still being true to their profession in some ways is heartening, right? That they're still doing what they're supposed to. But, this is the problem, right? He keeps putting out the same lies over and over and over again, and people are going to start figuring them out. The more that happens, the less likely it is that the Republicans will do well in 2020 and in anything between now and 2020. So there should be some concern that if the president's not going to be honest and say something that's so obviously of a lie or an exaggeration that he's going to get called out, it weakens their overall case for what they're working on. So, I think they realize, with the 2018 elections, when you have the biggest loss since Watergate in the House of Representatives for them, what he's doing really isn't working, no matter how much he thinks it is. But they're still, at least among many members of Congress, afraid to take him on.
Okay. The board is filling up with calls. Shall we jump into it?
Absolutely.
All right. Let's start out with Brad in Elk Grove Village, Illinois, listening on WCPT. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman Pocan. I think the Democratic Party really needs to focus its messaging on the fact that Trump and his supporters his supporters mainly, are so hateful and so racist that they will not just tolerate or put up with, but gladly and enthusiastically support a traitor, because that's how much they hate blacks, Hispanics, LGBTQ, women. And I think we need to appeal to that, let us say, 40% of Americans that are in the middle. You're never going to get the Trump people. They're just basically, they talk about American values, but that's not American. They're white and white supremacist values. That's their code word. But I think the Democratic Party really needs to focus on how the Republicans, the Trump Republicans, are not they're not about liberty and equality and justice for all.
Thanks,
and I'll
Brad.
take my comment off air.
Sure. Well, I agree. I think many of us have been saying this. These decisions, the only reason for a wall, it's not for stopping drugs, because I think 90% come in through legal points of entry. It's not for there's a problem because we've got a net migration in the last decade of people leaving. It's for one reason only: it's to keep brown colored skin people out of the United States, and that's clearly what Donald Trump is conveying through all of this, through every dog whistle, and sometimes more than that. And we've seen it, but that's only a small subset of the American public. So we're still winning in that we've got the vast majority of folks. But it is important to keep putting that fact out, that because there is no valid reason for a wall other than Donald Trump wants it. That's why I think when we say words like he's throwing a tantrum, or we talk about some of this, it's to try to help convey that there are other reasons for this. Many of us are very direct about those reasons, but I do think the American people are certainly beginning to understand that.
David, listening on WGRN in Columbus, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. I was interested in the initial H.R. 1 proposal by the Congress. Is there something that's a companion bill in the Senate? And I'm doing my best to call my representatives on these things, but what can we do to help that?
Sure. Well, David, thanks for your question. So H.R. 1, for everyone, as a reminder, is the Elections, Campaign Finance, and Ethics Reform Bill. So there's a lot of provisions in this bill, including, Tom, thanks to your listeners, the interstate cross-check issue we've talked about. That language is in H.R. 1.
Oh, great.
We fought for it to get in it because of conversations with your listeners. So I want your listeners to know we take things very seriously that come out of here. It became legislation last session because of our conversations, and we got it put into H.R. 1. So, and also paper ballots as well as in H.R. 1. So there isn't necessarily a corresponding bill in the Senate. I think they're going a different approach because the Republicans are in control on H.R. 1. But we hope that if we send it out of the House, you can put pressure on the Senate to take it up, and then we'll probably take a lot of these provisions and do them as individual bills as well to try to hit it at multiple angles. So if you're looking at who to call in the Senate, maybe it's to get them to find sponsors for some of these bills that we'll put out there, like our interstate cross-check bill, like our paper ballot bill, like a lot of the other measures that are in here. But we're also met this morning as Exec Committee in the Progressive Caucus. We're talking about the amendment process because we'd like to even beef it up more if possible. It's going to go to about 5 different committees that have jurisdiction over parts of it. And, we're going to hope to have the very best product coming out of the House, and we'd appreciate people's support.
Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, yes. Thank you, Mr. Pocan. I was asking, does the government have to be open before you guys can start holding hearings and subpoena people? Or can you do it during the shutdown? Because I was just curious on that, if it's because you're not going to get any help from Mitch McConnell from this morning. He's not going to pass nothing. Or does the government have to be open or closed before you start subpoenaing people?
We're getting impatient here, Congressman.
Yeah, I hear you. So, Russ, you know what? It's really more, at least in the House, I can talk about, that we are today going to be announcing existing members, I think, going on to exclusive committees. Between now and the end of next week, we'll probably have almost everyone on a committee, and then there'll be probably some final cleanup at the end of January. It's just we don't have our committees fully formed yet. There's nothing because of a shutdown that should stop us. Now, if there was a shutdown, someone might argue they're in a closed agency and they can't come and speak to us because there are rules about, some people aren't allowed to work during this if they're part of an agency that's affected. But it's not the reason it's holding anything up. Honestly, we're just in the process of trying to take all the members, put them on committees, and that begins today.
Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan at 202-808-9925 in just a moment. We've got calls on the board from Virginia, Iowa, California, Washington, and Oregon so far. A lot more coming. And we'll be right back with more of your calls for the Congressman in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program, Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls live right now. And welcome back. Congressman Pocan taking your calls. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Tom, thank you so much for this town hall, Tom. And Mr. Pocan, I don't know if I told you this before, but you are the next Bernie Sanders, so you should prepare yourself.
Thank you.
What I wanted to talk about is the, numbers of senators and congressmen, have dual citizenship. And I don't think that's a very noble thing. Is that an issue that we can do something about to make sure that if you're representing the people, you only have one citizenship? And the second question, any legislation that we can do to prevent future government shutdown? Thank you.
Yeah, so on the first one, I'm not aware of members that have dual citizenship, so I apologize on that. I haven't really ever put a thought to it. So, Omar, I will put some thoughts to it, but I'm not aware of the situation. On the second part, a part of it is we did take care of some of this last week in the House rules package. There is a provision that I never understood that every time you pass a spending bill, if you go above a certain amount and it lifts the debt ceiling, we had to have a separate vote on that. But you already voted on the budget to lift it. It was really another reason to cause problems. So whether it be the Republicans or the president who wants to have another reason to threaten a shutdown or anything else, we had to have another vote, another drama unfold. We took care of that in the rules so that now you automatically increase the debt ceiling when you have those votes, which makes a lot of sense and hasn't been in place for at least the last 8 years. So that's one measure that could make it a little better. But really, we just have to get the budget process done. And right now, I think today when we do our votes, you're going to find more Republicans voting with us, and it's going to continue that way because they're feeling the pressure from the shutdown. So even Donald Trump is no longer claiming ownership. You notice last night he tried to blame the Democrats. They know it's not good politically to be in charge of the shutdown.
George in Santee, California. We have a minute and a half to the break, George. Quick question.
Well, I would just like to ask Congressman Pocan if he would speak a little bit on the BDS movement. What is it, the boycott, divest, and sanction on the Israeli-Palestinian subject?
Yes, so there is a bill in the Senate I can talk about because in the House there is not a corresponding bill at this point moving that would affect people to have ability to support a movement that would boycott in Israel. And we see it as a First Amendment rights issue, at least we, meaning many of us in the progressive movement, that that shouldn't be something that passes. I'm disheartened to see the Senate do it in a bipartisan way because I think it's a bad idea to mess around with people's First Amendment rights. So that bill we have talked to our leadership about and been very strong that it should not come here and be something we vote on. And I believe we have some assurances that it won't happen in the House of Representatives.
We just have 30 seconds to the break.
Yeah.
Are you seeing any indications that this administration is doing anything to move forward a peace process between Israel and the Palestinians?
No, in fact, just the opposite. I think they've chosen a side, and it's very obvious they've chosen a side, and we no longer have the moral ability to try to be an arbitrator. And in fact, when I was in Japan last February, countries like that are talking about filling that role because everyone wants peace in the Middle East. We have given up our ability to be credible peace negotiators because of this White House.
Remarkable. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler awards. You can check out Congressman Pocan's website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. John in Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Thom Hartmann. How are you doing?
I'm well.
Thank you for your service, Mr. Mark Pocan. I was kind of indisposed of last week medically, so I didn't hear. I was just told, but I just wondered why 90 of the Progressive Caucus went along with the pay-go. I wondered that because that's a kneecapper right there. That would kneecap a lot of the Progressive Caucus from doing a lot of things.
Congressman?
Yeah, John, thanks for bringing it up. I'll try to be brief on this because then we did talk about it last week, but there was a lot of misinformation. And when I say lot, I mean giant capital letters lot around what happened. PAYGO has been the law of the land since 2010. It is not something that we had a separate vote on. Many people do not understand this. I've had a lot of conversations with people. We had a rules package that there was a provision that allows, that it had PAYGO mentioned because it allows the House the ability not only to waive the rule, but also to be a part of the rule should it be enacted on something like if Medicare spending goes farther, for example, that gives you an ability to not have the Republican Senate and the Republican House ultimately be able to do the cuts without Democrats involved. So there are a lot of reasons why the rule is very, very different than the law that existed. The statute should go. Many of us don't support PAYGO, and that's why we introduced a bill last week to actually get rid of that. But that was the target. So the problem was there's a target right in front of you, people were shooting to their left or right, missing the target, missing the issue, and improperly saying that there was a vote on PAYGO that was in the House of Representatives. There was a rules package that had language that was specifically there to make sure that we could influence the process through the statute PAYGO. The way you get rid of it is the statute. And absolutely, there's no way this was put in place to get rid of Medicare for All or any other progressive initiative. Otherwise, all the chairs of the Medicare for All caucus, all the members of the Progressive Caucus wouldn't have voted for it. So I think one person put out a tweet that was perhaps a little misinformed because they were going after the issue of PAYGO. It had a little bit of leverage from there. We do not support PAYGO. We're trying to get rid of it as actual law, which has been, again, in place since 2010. But the target was not the rule on Friday. And in fact, in the rules were things like I mentioned. We got rid of the debt ceiling rules so we can avoid shutdowns. There are a lot of other really progressive initiatives in there. And again, I think in the 280 characters, it's hard to get an issue like this out there. And the problem is the debate was all done on Twitter for the most part. And unfortunately, a lot of people, wanted to believe that everyone sucks in Washington. Sometimes I also want to believe that. In this particular case, I can tell you a lot of people, were doing what was right on that day. There was no vote on PAYGO, and many of them now are sponsoring our bill to get rid of it. But the debate last week got quite askew.
John in San Francisco, listening on our blowtorch station there, 910 Real Talk. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Congressman. This is John in San Francisco, and I was calling because last night was a good start, but it was only halfway. Having Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer stand and discuss the Democratic proposals and position is great, but what they need is audio-visual behind them, an assortment of flags from other states, and have a banner which has a few bullet points of what the Democrats stand for, because we need to provide a place for disaffected Republicans and independents to go. And if they don't see that, they just take the fake news and the Twitter-in-chief's information as verbatim. And if we're not putting out the messaging and doing that on a daily basis in Congress, when Congress is in session, I mean, we've got 300 senators and congressmen now that are Democrats, and you just change the assortment every day and have a different person, different people representing the Congress, what the work is every day between 4 and 5, say, East Coast time, and then get the message out and have that routine and give the Republicans and the independents a place to go, because right now they're looking for a place to go. And as Tom always says, we need to come out in overwhelming numbers, but this is a way to attract more numbers. What do you think?
Yeah, John, so let me answer it in two ways. First part, I think we are all saying this right now in Washington. We're trying to give examples, concrete examples of what the shutdown means and why it's an unnecessary fight over this border issue, especially keeping all the other agencies closed. It depends on what gets picked up. But I think to your first point, I don't know what the rules were, if they could do that or not, but that was the first thing I thought of, is if either the president or the Democrats had a good, the president used a bunch of fake video about, people at the wall and showing things when he described the problem. If we had used that, that's a much better visual than a couple talking heads standing in front of a podium. I'm guessing the rules were they couldn't do that, but I don't know that definitively. But that was my exact thought, is either one of them, if they had done that, they would have been far more effective than just the talking head, putting out facts, or in the case of the president, falsehoods about the issue. And I'm guessing it might have been a rule issue.
I would think that if they had just sat at a desk and made it look like they were in a news studio and because they were both there and talked with each other and the American people, it would have been more impactful. But it might not be possible, you're saying?
I don't know what the networks would have allowed, like would they have allowed video or not, but again, I think that would have been very effective. I agree with that.
Yeah, because you've got a nice studio there. The Senate has a really nice studio. Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. His website, pocan.house.gov. His Twitter handle, Rep. Mark Pocan. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. Back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls, Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan, in just a moment. For our book today, we're reading from Elon Papp's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. This is from the preface. It's titled The Red House. The Red House was a typical early Tel Avivian building, the pride of the Jewish builders and craftsmen who toiled over in the 1920s. It had been designed to house the head office of the local Workers' Council. It remained such until toward the end of 1947 it became the headquarters of the Haganah, the main Zionist underground militia in Palestine. Located near the sea on Yarkon Street in the northern part of Tel Aviv, the building formed another fine addition to the first Hebrew city on the Mediterranean, the White City, as its literati and pundits affectionately called it. For in those days, unlike today, the immaculate whiteness of his houses still bathed the town as a whole in the opulent brightness so typical of Mediterranean port cities of that era and that region. It was a sight for sore eyes, elegantly fusing Bauhaus motifs with native Palestinian architecture in an admixture that was called Levantine in the least derogatory sense of the term. Such too was the Red House, its simple rectangular features graced with frontal arches that framed the entrance and supported the balconies of its two upper stories. It was either its association with the workers' movement that had inspired the adjective red, or its pinkish tinge that it acquired during sunset that had given the house its name. The former was more fitting as the building continued to be associated with the Zionist version of socialism when, in the 1970s, it became the main office for Israel's kibbutzim movement. Houses like this, important historical remnants of the mandatory period, prompted UNESCO in 2003 to designate Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site. Today, the house is no longer there, a victim of development, which has razed this architectural relic to the ground to make room for a car park next to the new Sheraton Hotel. Thus, in this street, too, no traces left of the White City, which it has slowly transmogrified into the sprawling, polluted, extravagant metropolis that is the modern Tel Aviv. In this building on a cold Wednesday afternoon, 10 March 1948, a group of 11 men, veteran Zionist leaders, together with young military Jewish officers, put the final touches on a plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That same evening, military orders were dispatched to the units on the ground to prepare for the systematic expulsion of Palestinians from vast areas of the country. The orders came from a detailed description of the methods to be employed to forcibly evict the people: large-scale intimidation, laying siege to and bombarding villages and population centers, setting fire to homes, properties, goods, expulsion, demolition, and finally planting mines among the rubble to prevent any of the expelled inhabitants from returning. Each unit was issued with its own list of villages and neighborhoods as the targets of the master plan. Codenamed Plan D, Dalet in Hebrew, this was the fourth and final version of less substantial plans that outlined the fate the Zionists had in store for Palestine and consequently for its native population. The previous three schemes had articulated only obscurely how the Zionist leadership contemplated dealing with the presence of so many Palestinians living in the land that the Jewish national movement coveted as its own. This fourth and last blueprint spelled it out clearly and unambiguously. Quote, "The Palestinians have to go," end quote. In the words of one of the first historians to note the significance of that plan, Simcha Flapan, the military campaign against the Arabs, including the conquest and destruction of the rural areas, was set forth in the Haganah's Plan Dalet. The aim for the plan was, in fact, the destruction of both the rural and urban areas of Palestine. As the first chapters of this book will attempt to show, this plan was both the inevitable product of the Zionist ideological impulse to have an exclusively Jewish presence in Palestine, and a response to developments on the ground once the British cabinet had decided to end the mandate. Clashes with local Palestinian militias provided the perfect context and pretext for implementing the ideological vision of an ethnically cleansed Palestine. The Zionist policy was first based on retaliation against Palestinian attacks in February of 1947, and it transformed into an initiative to ethnically cleanse the country as a whole in March of 1948. Once the decision was taken, it took 6 months to complete the mission. When it was over, more than half of Palestine's native population, close to 800,000 people, had been uprooted. 531 villages had been destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods had been emptied of their inhabitants. The plan decided upon on 10 March 1948, and above all, its systematic implementation in the following months, was a clear-cut case of ethnic cleansing operation regarded under international law today as a crime against humanity. After the Holocaust, it has become impossible to conceal large-scale crimes against humanity. Our modern communication-driven world, especially since the upsurge of electronic media, no longer allows human-made catastrophes to remain hidden from the public eye or to be denied. And yet one such crime has been erased almost totally from the global public memory: the disposition of the Palestinians in 1948 by Israel. This, the most formative element in the modern history of the land of Palestine, has ever since been systematically denied and is still today not recognized as an historical fact, let alone acknowledged as a crime that needs to be confronted politically as well as morally. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity, and the people who perpetrate it today are considered criminals to be brought before special tribunals. It may be difficult to decide how one ought to refer to or deal with in the legal sphere those who initiated and perpetrated ethnic cleansing in Palestine in 1948. But it's impossible to reconstruct their crimes. Anyhow, it continues the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Last night I watched his statement or his TV speech, and the lie that I noticed the most was that how he projected that the Mexican government was going to pay for that wall, and it brought me right back to the Iraqi war only going to cost us a couple of $2 billion. Now we're $2 trillion in the hole for that Republican lie, and we have liabilities that are going to expand that in the future. So my point is that since we've had the tax cuts, and what is the projected deficit for next year, and how is that going to play into financing infrastructure and law enforcement, or enforcing these new regulations like the gun laws and stuff? How's that all going to work, Mark? Hello?
Congressman? Congressman, you are muted.
Sorry about that. I'm good now.
Go.
I joined the break. I apologize.
No, all good.
I had a really great thing to say, too. But
okay, well, try it again.
All right. Hey, Randy, so great point you're bringing up, which is exactly the problem, the hypocrisy between them saying that they're the fiscal conservatives, and then they pass a tax bill that has $2 trillion of added debt. And then days after, you may remember Paul Ryan said, oh, my God, the debt's exploding. We have to go after Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, things that actually benefit real people. This is the hypocrisy that the Republicans have been about forever, and you're watching it happen now. Even if it's just $5 billion on the wall now, the most conservative estimate I've seen is probably $70 billion if you actually were to put a wall up. First of all, as we pointed out, is unnecessary. But this is the problem. You know, they say that, and then when a small expenditure goes out, whether it be food stamps for kids or something like that, we have to fight tooth and nail. So in a way, I'm glad that they're helping us expose the hypocrisy. It's not just saying it. We're actually able to point to their actions. The problem is we also have to figure out how to fix that, because the $2 trillion on the tax deal alone makes it that we can't do many other things that we may want to do. And if infrastructure package is possible, there's going to be a big price tag on that. Now, there's plenty of ways we can raise revenue, and we should be taking a look at that, but they are full of hypocrisy, and I think you point out one of their biggest weaknesses.
Blaine in Thousand Oaks, California, listening on KPFK in Los Angeles. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, thanks for taking my call, guys. The difference between Republicans and the Democrats is Republicans repeat lies over and over to get their message through, and the Democrats are afraid to repeat the truth over and over. I mean, for example, Trump is a Russian puppet or tool. Trump is guilty of child abuse. Trump is a sociopathic liar. Why isn't this message? Tom's talked about this messaging over and over. I've heard him for years talk about it. And really, the Democrats that he's talked to, as recently as Perez, they just kind of listen and, agree and then ignore it. And it's not, and don't say the media won't cover you. You got to make bold statements like that. And believe me, the media will cover you because, it sells newspapers. But we have to get the conversation started. We have to use this messaging.
Yeah.
And
Blaine, I think you've made your point. Let's ask let the congressman respond.
Yeah, Blaine, so I think this is something that, as progressives, we've certainly tried to do, because we do have a lot of people in the caucus who think the way the path forward, the path to getting their ideas accepted and to winning is to appeal to the middle, and often they're talking about a very small subset in the middle. They think that they have to weaken what they say, and I agree. Our viewpoint has been, often half the people in the country vote because we're not talking to the other half. We actually talked more boldly about the things that you're pointing out, like health care for all, like a lot of the issues that we know people support, debt-free college, et cetera. You'd actually have more support, more people wanting to come out and vote and wanting to support these issues. So that's the big central point to the Progressive Caucus and what we talk about. The only difference I do have, Blaine, is I've now been doing this for about 25 years, is, the press don't always pick up the things that are said on the floor of Congress and that members are saying. And once in a while they'll hook onto a member or two, which is good, and then that can help amplify a message. But we still have an issue with that, and I don't quite have the answer to it. I know we've talked about it a number of times on this program, but I do think having the bigger, bolder ideas would certainly help to try to get that out.
Martin in Vashon, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, it's Martin Adams. Listen to KBCS. The military use of oil has been illegal to include in our emissions, and I'd like to know if it's possible to have the law repealed so that we know how much the war effort costs in emissions, and through that we might decide that we can't afford war anymore.
Are you saying, Martin, that the amount of oil that the military uses is classified information?
Correct.
Okay.
And I think we need to change that in order to deal with climate change.
Okay. Congressman?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could change that. I don't see any barrier to trying to change that. I don't know if it ultimately will be as big of an expense as I think a lot of the money we spend with private firms and buying sometimes unnecessary equipment and being in places that we should long have left a while ago. And I think some of those issues may be even stronger in showing how we could scale back defense spending and have more resources for education, healthcare, and other things that benefit people right here in the country. But specifically to your question, Martin, I don't know of a barrier that says you couldn't try to, as a Congress, change that law.
Dwayne in Warren, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, Congressman, first of all, Tom, I just love you. You are such a jewel.
Thanks, Dwayne.
Secondly, Congressman Pocan, you are too. But my question was, like, we just passed legal cannabis for recreational in Michigan, and as far as I understand, they can't use the banking system. And I'm wondering, is there anything in the works for letting states like Michigan use the banking system?
Yeah, great point, Dwayne. So there have been bills introduced, and I've been the sponsor of every single one, to get rid of this incredibly antiquated response. I mean, the federal government law around marijuana is about as backwards as you can get, from being able to test it for good medicinal uses to this antiquated law. There's plenty of states that have legal marijuana businesses that can't put their money in the bank. And I have a personal friend who had a legal growing operation in California who's since retired and could not put his money in a bank, and heard the personal ramifications of how absolutely ridiculous an antiquated law like that is. So absolutely, it's something that has been introduced. I think we will move something like that out of the House because there should be no reason, not even a partisan reason, to oppose that anymore. The last Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, had a real personal bias against marijuana, but I think this issue is long overdue, and congratulations in Michigan for voting on that and putting that into law on December 8th.
Poppy in Oak Ridge, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, good morning, Congressman Polkan. Thank you for coming on the show. I would like to ask you a question. And you championed for the voter suppression in 2018, and while you were doing that, my daughter lived in Oakland for 2 years, for about a 2-year span, and not in the white gentrification Oakland, but in the Lower East Side, predominantly black community. And one thing I learned while living there was elderly women are highly respected by the young males in Oakland. So I was wondering if forming a group nationwide, such as the Proud American Women of Color Voters, asking mothers to make sure that the younger generation registers to vote or re-registers in 2020, and maybe designate a certain month for that and a march for that issue, would that be enough to turn the tide against the Republican voters? Thank you.
Yeah, Poppy, I think your suggestion is good. Anything that we do to move the ball forward is important. You know, I'm very proud to be from Wisconsin. It's my home. I love it there. We used to be one of the top 3 turnout states for presidential races in the country, and then Scott Walker put voter suppression methods in place, and then we had the biggest drop-off outside of Mississippi, which was certainly not something we're proud of. But, you know, the only way you have a democracy is if everyone has access to it. The great equalizer, the Koch brothers, and my brother and I have one thing in common, and that's we all have an individual vote. So anything that we do to help get voters out and to end suppression is going to move democracy forward. So I would encourage you, Poppy, to move forward on an idea like that, and any idea that we have to try to make it so that every single person is able to vote. It'd be real important.
Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Middays with Mark. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. I want to send him a tweet just saying, hey, thanks for showing up, or anything else you'd like. And he is also the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan on Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Your media support group for We the People. Back with more of Congressman Mark Pocan in just a moment. And welcome back. Kim in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. Thanks for taking my call. We are in the midst of a constitutional crisis for which there's no obvious remedy that's been built in. We have a sitting president who is potentially there by way of fraud, and he's holding our nation hostage. So we've never been in a situation like this. So my question is the Democratic Party talking about naming this a constitutional emergency and pulling a full stop until things can be sorted out? Because we have lobbyists running all of the cabinets, and we have so much damage being done every day that we need to declare it a national emergency.
It's almost as if somebody sat down and said, let's damage the United States. Kim, thank you. Congressman?
We've been saying this: the humanitarian crisis isn't at the border. It's with this fight and what's going on with this White House. And more importantly, the Senate, I think, is saying they're not going to be moving bills until the government's reopened. So I think there may be, I'm not completely familiar with exactly everything the Senate's doing, but I think it sounds like they're finding a way to try to, with the unique rules they have in the Senate, try to slow down actions with a shutdown. But you're right. I mean, you know, all of this started a few weeks back when Donald Trump was getting a lot of bad press about the Mueller report and about Michael Cohen, his lawyer, flipping, and he had his dirty rat tweets and everything, and he had a lot of bad press. And he agreed to a deal that the Senate passed unanimously to reopen the government, and within a day he changed his mind. And I think a lot of the changing of the mind was trying to change the media conversation to something else. And quite honestly, he was successful, right? We're not talking about the direct woes he was talking about for a few weeks prior. So we just need to keep talking about what this is really about and what our values are about, because I think people connect at a value level better than an issue level, and I think we will be victorious.
Morris in Long Beach, California, listening on KPFK. A minute and a half to the break. Morris, quick one for the congressman.
Oh, I just need 30 seconds. Happy Wednesday to everybody. Listen, I believe that as long as you got an investigation, you're going to have a shutdown. Congressman, I believe that the Mueller investigation is pretty much done, and Mr. Rosenstein is going to come to California and start growing cannabis. And now that we got Nancy Pelosi, Miss Pelosi, that's head of the House of Representatives, that report is now going to see the day of light. What do you think of my comments? I'll take your comments off the air. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Mueller investigation, as investigations go, has been doing a tremendous job. You've got 40 or so indictments. We had 4 years on Benghazi with 0 indictments, 2 years on Hillary's emails, 0 indictments, not even 2 years and 40 indictments. It's running its course. It appears to be closing in on a circle, and we're really looking forward to seeing what the final result is.
If there's fire where there is smoke, then there's got to be a hell of a lot of fire here. With 40 different indictments, that's a lot of smoke.
Yeah, it's more than smoke, right? That's sparks. That's everything else that comes with fire. It just, we're missing
If
right
Mueller
thing.
came out and said, okay, here's the proof that Trump was elected with the help of a foreign government, or maybe even multiple foreign governments, is there any response to that other than impeachment?
I can't think of one. It's going to be real tough in the Senate, but I can't think of a different response you'd have.
That's pretty breathtaking. Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the top of the hour, 11 minutes before. We'll be right back with more Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Just a second. Welcome back to Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. Ken in Denver, Colorado, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, how can we expect any legislation to get through from Congress to the Senate with their obstructionism that they've been doing? I try to call Cory Gardner. I email him. I'm lucky if I get back a form letter. And I try to call the office, and they're always get rolled over to voicemail. They're not listening.
Well, that's because he's a Republican, right? Congressman?
Well, Ken's bringing up, I hear all the time in Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, you can't get through to, our Republican senator. Tammy Baldwin has people answer the phone. But it's a real problem that we're experiencing right now, especially with Republicans in the Senate. So we're going to send things over. We're going to keep sending bills over. We'll show people what the path forward if they had different people in charge of the Senate. And hopefully that'll be the message, or hopefully they'll see the light, especially, given where investigations may go.
Van in Lewis Center, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon and Happy New Year. I have just a real quick rant. I'm overly tired of talking about Trump's base and making the majority of Americans seem insignificant. I mean, I don't hear anyone pointing out the fact that he's only serving his base, and the rest of us, have got to sit by here and take it. So I would like everybody to start talking about the majority of Americans and stop talking about his base. That's why he got so much power now, because he put so much importance in those people. And the last thing is, the one thing that's been open and has continued to go on during this government shutdown is the post office. So save the post office. And that's all I have to say, and have a good day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Van. So let me say, I hear it all the time. We're saying that they're appealing to a small subset, which is his base, which is at best at 35%, and he's not appealing to the rest of America. We do say that on a very, very regular basis. So that is happening. The problem is for the Republicans, because of gerrymandering, they are afraid of that small base because that can create primaries for them, and they can have Tea Party people challenging them. So that's why they continue to appeal to that small subset, and that's why people talk about their base. Because I agree, 100 minus 35 is 65. Last time I looked, you need 50.1% or one vote over 50%. We clearly have the majority of America that aren't in that place. The problem is when it comes to Republican primaries, that 35% suddenly is amplified, and it really matters, and that's the difference.
Joe in Loxahatchee, Florida. Am I saying that right, Joe?
Yeah, Loxahatchee.
Okay, you're on the air.
Thank you for taking my call, and thank you for doing what you're doing. I am wondering, since the Supreme Court made corporations a person, are they now responsible also to pay full Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid taxes on their profits? And if not, should legislation be introduced to make them pay that ball?
Yeah, great point, Joe. And, many of us, we would love to change a lot in this area. And I know in our Congressional Progressive Caucus budget, we do a lot of things that affect some of the powers that corporations have. I think one of the good things that you will see, come out of this Congress, and not just a hope, but I think I could say it will happen, is some antitrust stuff and some measures starting to go after some of these big corporate behaviors. Because, it's not just the End Citizens United sort of a corporation is not a person and money is not free speech, but it is all the other ramifications that are out there. They're a person when it's convenient, they're not when it's not, and they certainly have changed how America operates when we respond to them and where the income distributions are and everything else that we've got to address. So I think you'll see some measures move forward that address corporate power, and I think especially in the area of antitrust, which is something that's way, way overdue.
Gene in Myerstown, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yeah, hi, Congressman Pocan and Tom. One of my pet peeves is that when on the mainstream news, when they're talking about the wall, they come up with immigration, and then the talking head, whatever guest they have, says, yes, we need immigration reform. Now, the next question from the moderator should be, what does that mean to you? If you had a magic wand, what would be your measures to make the border safer and to solve this problem? They never, ever, ever ask that question. Now, this morning I was amazed watching Morning Joe. Congressman, do you know Will Hurd, representative from Texas?
Yes.
And along with Pete Aguilar.
Yeah, Gene, we're running out of time here. Quick question, please. Well, I guess actually you've already asked it, which is, what is the plan?
Yeah, and I think many of us point to what went through the Senate now three sessions ago with about 70 votes in a bipartisan way would be a good framework to start. That includes a pathway to citizenship for aspiring Americans as well as additional protections at the border. But you can't, the president's saying, give me the wall and then we'll talk about DACA and citizenship and everything else. And we know that the rest will never happen. That's why I think you often hear people say, look, let's talk about it in a comprehensive way, meaning pathways to citizenship, meaning addressing the wall, meaning addressing DACA, meaning all of those issues as went through the Senate about 3 sessions ago.
We just have a minute to the end of the hour, the end of the show here, Congressman. A quick question on follow-up on that. What do you think about Congress, for family reunification, naming the bill the Melania Trump Memorial Bill or something like that? Because, her family, her parents were just made citizens. And it was through this whole, chain migration thing that Trump is so hysterical about.
Well, and I think that's such an important point to bring up. Had her parents been brown or black skin, it wouldn't be the same conversation, right? And That's the problem with everything about Donald Trump, is it is rooted at his racism and the racism that he's appealing to, that he's decided to appeal to in his presidency. So, we need to make sure that we keep bringing that up because, again, I think most people in this country are fair-minded. We see people still support immigration. The president's wrong on every side of the issue by polling. But we need to be bold enough to keep pointing out what the real problem is. This president is appealing to a very racist way.
Amen. Congressman Mark Pocan, thank you so much for being with us every week. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of our program as we continue. Right after this, it's 57 minutes, coming up on 58 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program. This is our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 Election and the Transformation of American Politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show. And Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. "Run, Bobby, run" is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Mortal Republic.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I want to talk about brazenness and Donald Trump. And by the way, a tip of the hat to Congressman Mark Pocan, who just spent an hour taking your calls. It is so great having members of Congress regularly come on this program and basically run a national town hall. Or I guess I'm running the national town hall. They're the featured guest, and it just really, really works well. Anyhow, brazenness. Donald, there is this quality of leadership that you find among some of our most successful presidents. And it's called brazenness. Brazenness is the willingness or ability essentially, I guess it's kind of back of the envelope description, but basically a strong belief in one's own, in fact, a high level of certainty in one's own correctness, that what one is doing is the right thing, and a willingness to stick with it to the bitter end, regardless of the consequences. This is how Winston Churchill helped win World War II. This is how Franklin Roosevelt pushed through the New Deal over overwhelming opposition from Republicans who called it communism and socialism. This is how Abraham Lincoln fought the Civil War. There's still a debate about that. He decided, he initially thought that war was going to last 4 or 5 months, or maybe even a few weeks, that it wouldn't be that big a deal to put down the South, and it turned into a multi-year, 700,000 Americans dead disaster. Or was it not a disaster? Did it hold the Union together? I mean, but the bottom line is that he was willing to do it at great cost and that just tore him apart, Lincoln. This is what John Kennedy had when he confronted the Soviets around the Cuban Missile Crisis. This brazenness is a quality of leadership. Now, it can be leadership for good or leadership for bad. Adolf Hitler was also brazen, as was Mussolini. This is, a very powerful characteristic that can cut either way. And it turns out that Donald Trump, when they're doing these psychological analyses of various presidents, Donald Trump is right up there with some of our best presidents in terms of brazenness. The problem is, and this is a real problem, that those other presidents had a complete toolkit of skills that Trump lacks. They also had morality. Trump lacks morality. They also had intelligence. Trump lacks intelligence. They had curiosity. Trump lacks curiosity. They had introspection, the ability to look at themselves and with even a critical eye. Trump is completely incapable of introspection. They had empathy. They understood the plight of other people. In fact, Abraham Lincoln's empathy for the victims of the Civil War tore him apart. Same with FDR during World War II. And they had foresight, the ability to predict the future result that was the consequence of a current behavior. So here, in my opinion, we have the worst possible combination of personality characteristics right now in the White House. You have somebody who's functionally a sociopath, he lacks empathy, who is only of moderate intelligence, perhaps less than that, but is very sly, is very cunning. These are the classic characteristics of a mid-level con man. If Trump hadn't been born rich, I am convinced that he would be a recidivist con man. He'd be the guy who's been to jail 15, 20 times at this point in his life. And, for securities fraud or for ripping off people, he'd be the guy who's running the phone operation where they're calling up people telling them that they need their credit card, whatever. I mean, he is a hustler. But when you combine brazenness with that, which has been a characteristic just very on display throughout his entire life, in his business career and everything else, again, it got him to the top, and then his lack of morality, intelligence, curiosity, introspection, empathy, and foresight, his lack of the other typical characteristics that make us a human being, took him down. And it's going to take him down again. And the tragedy is that he's taking our country with him. This is the full-blown tragedy. Our national parks are falling apart right now. Yucca Mountain National Park has been so badly damaged, it may take a year or two to open it back up. There's no rangers. You've had several people die in our national parks. In one case, we didn't even know it for a week because there were no rangers there to find the dead body. I mean, and that's just, the tiny tip of the iceberg. You've got lobbyists who are now running the EPA. You've got lobbyists now running the Interior Department. You've got piss poor, pathetic, third string lawyers a lawyer, Matt Whitaker, and now this other guy that they've appointed to be Attorney General, running the Justice Department. You've got Betsy DeVos, a lifelong opponent of public education, running the Education Department. You've got Wilbur Ross, another hustler, another scam artist, a guy who was running a bank in Cyprus, who owned half of a bank in Cyprus, that appears to be one of the major transshipment points for a lot of the corrupt money that Trump might have been laundering, that might have been coming from Russian and other oligarchs, including this thing that was revealed yesterday in the Manafort stuff. It looks like Manafort was actually feeding poll numbers back to somebody who could pass it along to the Internet Research Bureau, which was coordinating the Facebook attacks on Hillary Clinton during the campaign in 2016. I mean, if that was the case, that's like really high-level evidence that there was an actual campaign being run by a foreign government, or people within a foreign country anyway, or both, to win an American election. Double, triple down on, Donald Trump is an absolutely illegitimate president. He became president by virtue of fraud and foreign intervention. I mean, as this is slowly starting to sink into the American people, they're having this oh my God moment. And increasingly Americans are realizing that Donald Trump does not have those basic human qualities of foresight, of empathy, of curiosity, of introspection, of intelligence, and of morality. That multidimensional stuff that makes us functioning humans and functioning members of society. He doesn't have it. But he does have that brazenness, the ability to stand up there and say, I alone can fix it. Now, when that brazenness has been tempered by these other characteristics of morality, intelligence, curiosity, introspection, empathy, and foresight, then you have a genuine leader. Then you have John Kennedy, you have Lyndon Johnson, you have, I would say Dwight Eisenhower, certainly FDR. But brazenness all by itself in the hands of a sociopath and in the hands of a person lacking morality, lacking intelligence, lacking the ability to engage in introspection, lacking the ability to feel what others are feeling, lacking empathy, lacking the ability to understand and predict the future consequences of his current behavior, foresight, and that's super on display with his business career. Look at how many people came to Donald Trump and said, hey, let's put your name on some stakes. Here's the projected cash flow for the next 3 years. This is going to add $1 million a week to your bottom line. And Trump is like, cool, sign me up. And it goes up and it goes down. It crashes. Trump University, Trump Airline, Trump Wine, you just go through the list. I think Trump Wine might still be around, but most of these businesses that he started, failed. Why? Well, there's an old saying, it's easier to sell things to salesmen than anybody else, or salespeople. It kind of contrasts with the, you can't con a con. Yes, you can. Con men are easy, they're suckers. Salespeople are suckers for a good sales pitch. And in the case of Donald Trump, amplify that times 100, because he lacks foresight. He lacks the ability to say, well, okay, if we start this university and we do it basically as a scam, as a grift, how long is it going to be before we get caught? Or what will the consequences be? He doesn't game things out. And to have somebody who doesn't have that ability in the White House is a threat to our nation. It's a threat to national security. It's a threat to our future. One of the real existential threats we're facing right now is global climate change. It's a piece over on arctic-news.blogspot.com right now, suggesting that we might be 2 years away from the beginning of a major extinction event. If the Arctic goes ice-free, this is kind of like a Y2K moment. We had no idea what was going to happen when the clocks turned to the year 2000, because Windows operating system, worked on 2 digits rather than 4 digits for the year. And so because of this, cost-cutting thing apparently at Microsoft, everybody was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Well, it turned out nothing really happened. But similarly, we don't know what's going to happen when the Arctic goes ice-free. Is it going to cause wild weather patterns all around the world, massive cyclones and hurricanes just continuously raking the landscape? We honestly don't know. And scientists are starting to freak out. This is real stuff. But Donald Trump is paying no attention to that because the entire Republican Party is taking money from fossil fuel billionaires. And they know that the only way they can continue to survive is with think tanks funded by fossil fuel billionaires, networks and websites and media funded by fossil fuel billionaires. And so they've got to suck up to the fossil fuel billionaires who are trying to get every single last dollar they can out of the oil supplies on Earth before it runs out or before we all die. I mean, before it just all crashes. We have a crisis. So my question for you, in addition to the kind of, everything goes that Congressman Pocan kicked off in the first hour with, by answering questions on a whole variety of topics. My question is, how do we best deal with this? I think we need to start out by actually pointing it out, that the real crisis right now is not on our border. It's in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, as a number of Democratic politicians have been saying, but I think we need to understand it in this much larger frame. We're talking about the possible extinction of the human race. We're talking about the survival of a democracy in the United States. We're talking about the survival of democracy around the world. We're talking about the possibility of nuclear war if a mistake is made. A nuclear war could destroy the human race. This is serious stuff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So with that, I kick it open to your thoughts. We'll pick up your calls after this. These are really serious times. And welcome back. Paulette in New York City. Hey, Paulette, what's up?
Hi, good afternoon, Tom. When you said that leaders are brazen, the brazenness of leaders,
yeah.
What I found about, for me, the word that I found to describe Donald Trump that I could come to grips with, he's indifferent.
Yeah. And I think that's because he lacks empathy, he lacks understanding, so he doesn't have a basis for the emotions that would cause us to think he's not indifferent. Yeah. Paulette, well said. Thank you very much. I mean, back years ago, Louise and I took a seminar from Robert McKee called Story. He's got a book by the same name. He's a guy who teaches actors, screenwriters, novelists how to create stories. And one of the things that McGee pointed out in this seminar was that the opposite of love is not hate. Now think about that for a minute. The opposite of love is not hate. So what is the opposite of love? It's indifference. That's even more brutal. Hate actually sticks you to another person, just like love does. Indifference? No. So if Trump is, as Paulette said, indifferent, if that's really his principal characteristic, then we don't exist to him. Now, think about the consequences of that for a minute. Think about what that means. I mean, we know right now 800,000 civil service employees apparently don't matter to him, don't mean anything to him. He held he let the media into his signing ceremony or whatever it was this morning in the White House, and he made the comment. He lied as he always does, and said, well, the majority of government employees support what I'm doing. Well, there's no way to know that that's true or not, but odds are the majority of government employees don't think that it's a good idea that they not get a paycheck so that Trump can use that to bludgeon Congress to get his damn wall so that he can say to his voting, his base that yep, I kept my campaign promise. This is, we know, a very high value of Donald Trump's to say anyway, or be able to appear to have kept his campaign promise. Last night he said that Mexico is going to pay for the wall through the new and improved NAFTA, which is not even, past Congress yet. But that lack of empathy, that, as Paulette correctly pointed out, I mean, that's a mind-boggling point. It's even more destructive than hatred. Now, he certainly has obviously a lot of hatred mostly against people whose skin is darker than his. He has a lot of hatred. I mean, you know, go back to the Central Park Five. Go back to the comments he's made over the years repeatedly about the intellect of African Americans, about the morality of Mexicans, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you know, this guy harbors racist sentiments, you know, right up there with, you know, Bull Connor. But when you add to that this brazenness and this lack of empathy that leads to this virtually sociopathic indifference, and Paulette so nailed it with that word, that is the danger to the republic, in my opinion. That is, you know, it's Trump's personality disorders that represent the greatest threat to our country right at this moment, and to the world, frankly. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's coming up on 23 minutes past the hour. Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Getting your thoughts on my rants. Nick in New Orleans, it says you disagree with me. Why so? What's up? What am I missing?
Yeah, I was going to talk about some of the other stuff that you're saying about Trump. Now, I've forgotten even what you were saying because then you kept bringing new topics that were getting my dander up. It's the Central Park Five, the fake global warming. I don't know where to begin. None of that is true. He doesn't hate black people. I don't know why you guys keep bringing that up. Donald Trump was never accused of being a racist before he ran for president. Now that's all you guys can do is attack people.
Really, you don't recall when he ran the full page ad in the New York Times calling for the death penalty for five guys who didn't commit a crime?
How is that racist?
He continues to call for their death penalty. They've been exonerated. The guy who actually committed the crime has been convicted. In fact, he confessed. And he was a white guy.
The people who committed the crime, one of their family members said that he only held their legs down. He didn't commit the rape, and this is their testimony. DNA does not exonerate multiple rapists. DNA is often not found in a rape scene.
Those guys weren't even there, Nick.
Huh?
Those guys weren't even there. I mean, are you seriously trying to relitigate the Central Park Five?
No, I'm not relitigating. I actually read the evidence. You didn't read the evidence. Multiple people raped this woman. They only found one person's DNA. You're not going to find everybody's DNA in a multiple rape. This is common knowledge in rape cases.
This is Nick. Where did you learn this? Did you learn this on Fox?
No.
Did you hear this from Michael Savage or Rush Limbaugh? I mean, where did you learn this?
Fox is not an argument. Fox is not an argument. I went and looked at the evidence. So none of what I'm saying is false. Have you looked at it?
I've certainly read enough news stories about it.
You're not even.
But the Central Park Five is not the only evidence of Trump's racism. I mean, he has made racist statements throughout his life. His dad was arrested at a Klan rally. One of his jobs when he worked for his father was writing the letter C for colored on rental applications so that they could keep black people out of his dad's apartment buildings.
So this is an example of what I'm talking about. Racism is such a big accusation that when you accuse somebody of racist, they should have lots of evidence of racist actions.
I think we have a
When you bring
lifetime
up
of
the
that
first
evidence.
thing you say is his dad was a racist as an example of his racism is pathetic. I mean, first of all, his dad wasn't a racist, but I'm not going to go because this is what that's why you need dog
This is absolutely amazing, Nick. This is absolutely amazing that you're taking this position. I'm just astonished. I'm like speechless. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Boy, the kind of poison that apparently has been spread into Nick's bloodstream. This is really sad.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Reading today from Justin Frank, Dr. Justin Frank's book, Trump on the Couch, Inside the Mind of the President. He's the guy who wrote Bush on the Couch and Obama on the Couch. He's a psychiatrist and professor of psychiatry in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And the book just came out. This is from the introduction. There's no question that Trump is mentally unfit in ways that make him psychologically unsuited for the presidency. That in itself is a truly alarming turn of events. And I'd write the entire book in all caps if I thought that would better convey the sense of urgency with which it is written and should be read. Any number of troubling mental illness diagnoses and character evaluations can be and have been accurately applied to Trump. Both can vary from analyst to analyst, however, without necessarily sacrificing any of the accuracy. More to the point, the true value of a diagnosis is to determine an appropriate course of treatment, and there's no indication that any sort of treatment is a viable option. Trump on the Couch then seeks not simply to make the case that Trump is not well, but rather to show how he is unwell in ways that would have been of particular interest to the applied psychoanalysts whose investigation likely preceded our own, the Russians, and perhaps even their American allies or counterparts, who in the long tradition of intelligence gathering examined Trump's psyche and found an opportunity for exploitation. Trump's presidency caps a lifetime of dysfunction and disorder that is not likely to be healed while he is in office, just as Trump's ascendancy among voters gives expression to long-standing trends in the American electorate's psyche that are not going to be easily addressed. However, if we can identify certain aspects of these disorders and trends that may have contributed to Trump and his voters fusing into a shared belief system, then we have a better chance of fostering the kind of honest cultural discussion that will be necessary in order to contain and repair the damage that has already been done. Understanding Trump calls for a consideration of his psychodynamics almost certainly more rigorous than he has ever embarked upon on his own. Trump dismissed psychotherapy as a crutch in his 2004 Playboy interview. Years later, talking to biographer Michael D'Antonio, he described in greater detail a generalized aversion to introspection beyond the therapeutic setting. Quote, "I don't like to analyze myself because I might not like what I see," he told D'Antonio. "I don't like to analyze myself. I don't like to think too much about the past," end of quote. Even armed with a detailed family history, we can't capture Trump in action with only the tools of applied psychoanalysis. Like some of the most disturbed patients I've worked with, Trump is so erratic, constantly changing the topic, elevating the stakes, and raising the volume, that one doesn't know what to expect from him next. It's hard to imagine him in treatment, even as the subject of an applied psychoanalytical investigation. He behaves like a patient who is simultaneously banging in the consulting room window, rattling on his door, ringing the phone, and texting or tweeting his demands for attention. Trump presents so many troubling affects that it's hard to remember them all. In the final weeks of the first year of Trump's presidency, Michael Wolff and David K. Johnston published accounts of the Trump White House that present a president with a startling number of disturbing characteristics. Any one of these demonstrable and suspected traits would raise calls for a psychoanalytic investigation if it was done on a layperson. In a president, in aggregate, they are truly cause for alarm. The list of worrisome, evident, and alleged attributes that emerge in these and other portraits is long. Narcissist, liar, racist, sexist, adulterer, baby, hypocrite, chiseler, tax cheat, outlaw, psychopath, paranoid, fraud, ignorant, vengeful, delusional, arrogant, greedy, contemptuous, unsympathetic, learning disabled, cruel, obstructor of justice, threat to the Constitution, traitor. The list is so long that it can be overwhelming. It's a challenge to remember the beginning by the time you make it to the end. There are times when I wish someone would help us remember all the troubling aspects of Trump's character and behavior, past and present, in a way that would encourage recognition of the totality of his pathology, rather than its component parts, which individually cause alarm before being temporarily forgotten when the next emergency presents itself. As an applied psychoanalyst, my task is not only to appreciate the full list, but also to ignore the big picture and focus on a single pathology at a time. Practitioners of applied psychoanalysis approach their subject as both theoretician and clinician. The theoretician endeavors to piece things together, to figure things out, while the clinician tries to approach each session capable of being surprised, as if his mind were a blank slate. The analysis in the following pages aspires to accomplish both goals: reviewing Trump's record with a clinician's eye, preparing to be surprised by the unexpected observation, and assembling these findings into a more comprehensive portrait. The image of hypothetical patient Trump rattling the consulting room door and banging on the window reminds us that President Trump doesn't want us to see the entire list at once. Not only that, but patients I've treated who are reminiscent of Trump cannot tolerate being inside the consulting room either. They leave my office whenever they feel unable to think their way through an anxiety-provoking interpretation, much the way Trump leaves press briefings when the questions get too close. Trump on the Couch by Justin Frank.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. As I've mentioned many times, one of the fastest ways to get information to me is to simply tweet it at me. I actually read my own Twitter feed and usually write my own tweets. I mean, obviously, you know, if we're putting up videos from the show, that's something that's typically done by Nate, you know, who is our video director here. But you know, the opinion pieces and whatnot, that's me. And John and Joe in Indy just tweeted me an article from the New York Times, and thank you for that. It's called Donald Trump's Racism, the Definitive List. This was published January 15th, 2008 by David Leonhardt and Ian Prasad Philbrick. And it starts out, Trump's real estate company tried to avoid renting apartments to African Americans in the 70s. Donald Trump, second one, Trump says, black guys counting my money, I hate it. I think that the guy is lazy. It's probably not his fault because laziness is a trait in blacks. This quote from Trump. Called for the death penalty for 5 black and Latino teenagers. He said, quote, I would love to be a well-educated black because I really believe they do have an advantage, really. He called Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals. He used the gang MS-13 to disparage all immigrants. He called for a complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. He said Trump University was a bad decision because the judge was Mexican. He said that on June 2017, he said all immigrants from Haiti have AIDS. He said that the 40,000 Nigerians who are in the United States, or Nigerian immigrants, should go back to their huts in Africa. He called on January 11th in the White House, he called for less immigration from Haiti and Africa and more immigration from Norway. He spent years promoting the lie that our first black president, Barack Obama, was born in Kenya, not the United States. He said that Obama, who was the editor-in-chief of the Harvard Law Review, a straight-A student, he said he was a terrible student, terrible. He frequently claimed that Obama did not work hard as a president. This is his whole lazy trope. He falsely claimed that Obama issued a statement for Kwanzaa, but not for Christmas. He characterizes the African-American experience in the United States as living in hell, and Hispanics as well. He frequently offers false crime statistics to exaggerate urban crime, including lies about Oakland, Philadelphia, and Ferguson, Missouri. He is quick to highlight crimes committed by dark-skinned people. He frequently criticizes prominent African Americans for being unpatriotic, ungrateful, and disrespectful, like taking the knee. He called Puerto Ricans who criticized his administration's response to Hurricane Maria politically motivated ingrates. He retweets white nationalists and has on several occasions and never apologizes for it. He called some of those who marched alongside white supremacists in Charlottesville very fine people. The Ku Klux Klan, their former leader, David Duke, endorsed his presidency, and he didn't disavow it for quite some time, repeatedly refused to. Steve Bannon under Breitbart, made white nationalism a central theme. In fact, they had a section on Breitbart called Black Crime. He endorsed and campaigned for Roy Moore, who spoke positively about slavery and called for an African-American Muslim member of Congress not to be seated because of his religion. He pardoned and fulsomely praises Joe Arpaio, who racially profiled Latinos. In the 1990s, he took out advertisements alleging that, quote, the Mohawk Indian record of criminal activity is well documented, when he was trying to knock the Indians out of competition for his casinos. In a radio interview, he said Native Americans in Connecticut were faking their ancestry. He says, I think I might have more Indian blood than the so-called Indians that are trying to open up the reservations. He referred to Elizabeth Warren as Pocahontas. He trafficked in anti-Semitic caricatures, including the tweeting of a six-pointed star alongside a pile of cash. He's been reluctant to condemn anti-Semitic attacks. When he was in a White House meeting with an intelligence analyst who was briefing him on Pakistan, this intelligence analyst was born in the United States, but his ancestry was Korean, so he looked Asian. Trump asked, why wasn't she working on North Korea policy? She was born in the United States. She's an expert on Pakistan. He once referred to a Hispanic Miss Universe as Miss Housekeeping. In June 2016 at a rally, he pointed to the one black guy in the audience and said, look at my African American over there. Look at him. It's bizarre. Rick in Lexington, Kentucky. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Thanks, Mr. Hartman, for taking my call, and thanks for being my personal Mr. Rogers. I told you that before.
Thank you, Rick.
What I would like to ask you is, basically, all of that you just said is fine and dandy, but how about if we had 2 or 3 people in network news across the country talk to white people, white men, the way the president talks about immigrants and brown people? I say that because basically you are trying to do better, but I've told you this before too. Quit hiding behind Republicans, conservatives, and evangelicals and his base, and practice implementing white people into those words. America needs to hear this. They need to hear white people. Trump doesn't scare me, okay? He's going to come and go. Nick scares me, okay?
The guy who called. I get it, Rick, and that's, and the majority of my audience is probably white, and almost certainly, and that's why I talk about these issues, because I agree with you. This consciousness has to be soaking into the white population of this country. If it doesn't, we're screwed.
I know it's hard for white people to listen to, hey, you're calling me a bigot and a racist. That's just what Nick did. But it's amazing the way on the news, the way white people talk to white people.
Right.
All I'm asking is for somebody on the network to say, hey, let's talk to white people.
Yeah.
Because it's needed.
No, I'm with you, Rick. And essentially what that last caller was doing was betraying his own racism, his own probably misogyny as well, but certainly, because all we talked about was race, was just revealing his own racism, and that's a real tragedy. Rick, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Kenyatta in Redlands, California. Hey, Kenyatta, what's up?
How are you, Mr. Hartman?
I am well. How are you?
Outstanding, sir. I wanted to very compelling statements from you the last few minutes. So one of the things in talking about Donald Trump's brazenness that you failed to mention was his cowardice. And I was always taught from a very young age that a scared man is the most dangerous person in the world.
Yes, the equivalent of a cornered rat.
However, a scared man is operating out of fear, which may be related to some level of nobility. The only thing that is more dangerous than a scared man is a coward, because a coward is not operating out of any nobility whatsoever. In fact, the antithesis of that. Donald Trump's 5 deferments in the Vietnam War, and then to turn around a few days ago and talk about how he'd be a good general, well, it speaks for itself. I just wanted to point that out. Yeah. The other thing, you went down this New York Times, I think you said it was, a litany of Donald Trump's racist comments, and I'm speaking from a black man viewpoint. One of the things that was left out of that list, and it's a long one, you'd be on the air all day, was his reference to countries in Africa as S-holes, and calling players in the NFL who are predominantly black sons of bitches. So I think that anyone that questions where this guy's racial sentiments are is either a fool or willingly ignorant.
Or a racist. Or a fellow racist.
Well, I'm trying to be diplomatic, Tom.
But I don't need to be.
Exactly. Lastly, I wanted to point this out, Tom. We can talk about the degenerate nature of Donald Trump, and he is that. And everything you talked about, hustler, con man, low intelligence, the whole bit. However, Donald Trump is not the disease. He is a symptom. He is a mirror. He is a reflection of the American society. He is a reflection of what has gradually, the slow burn of this so-called democracy over many, many administrations and many, many years. And in his defense, I think it is because he was elected by the American people. He was. And we can talk popular vote, electoral votes. That's not the point. But significant enough Americans, and that is the issue. He's like a person that looks in the mirror. Take my 50-something years. I look in the mirror and I see lines I didn't see yesterday. I see all kinds of things. Whether or not I like it is up to me. But if I don't like what I see in that mirror, it doesn't change what's in there. Now, I can go get a facelift or whatever, but what I see is what I see. And I think the problem here is that the American public refuses to understand that this country is steeped in racism. You talk about this guy being a racist. Goldwater did the same thing. Bush did the same thing. Bush Sr., H.W. with Willie Horton, I think it was. Yep. This is tried and true, man. Listen, this is the political, base, the denominator of American society. All you need to do is get white people afraid of black people in particular, and any hue that is short of being pink, and it's going down.
Yeah, this is the logical end of Nixon's Southern strategy back in 1968. Kenyatta, spot on. Thank you so much for the call. It's always great to hear from you, and you always just tee it up and pop it out. Really, really well done. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We're going to check in with Talk Media News in about 4 minutes here and find out what's going on in the world today. And then as we roll into our third hour, we'll continue with your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back. Donald Trump, by the way, is threatening to cut off FEMA aid to California if they don't start raking the leaves in their forests. Honest to God. And welcome back. Rich in Indiana. Hey, Rich, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, thanks very much. Believe it or not, my very first call to the show, way back when, was right after Kenyatta.
Interesting.
Yep. And, some things you just hang on to as a wonderful recollection.
Well, he is often not just, trenchant in his observations. He's often profound.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well,
memorable.
Let me offer this real quick about last night's burbling from the Resolute desk when there was that plea for fundraising. All I could think about was how softened up the people that he was talking to, that was designed and directed for, were getting that message. These are people who have listened for decades to evangelical preachers and do, in fact, give their last nickel for somebody to have a better jet.
Yeah.
This guy will stand up to the audience and say, God has told me I need the next bigger jet. And people give money for that stuff. And they're given it. Now we understand there's a detail of terrible truth that people are going into their pocket and going without dialysis.
Yeah. And insulin. In fact, a young man just died a couple days ago because he couldn't keep up his insulin. He was a type 1 diabetic.
What I want to link now with Kenyatta's observations is that one of the most potent things that twins with that audience's ability to be touched by the evangelical is to be touched by their racism and their fear of other.
Well, I think the white evangelical movement is, to a large extent, steeped in racism, in large part because of its birth. I mean, just like this country was birthed in genocide against Native Americans and enslavement of African Americans, the modern-day white evangelical movement really evolved, really emerged in the late 1950s with these all-white Christian academies. Virginia shut down the entire state's public schools for a year in response to Brown versus Board of Education, or actually in response to the decision 2 or 3 years after that said, yes, we mean it, and you must integrate. And at that point, Virginia said, okay, that's it, we're out of here. And what replaced public education were these Christian academies, and they were all run by these Protestant evangelical groups. And, and they started popping up all over the country. They still exist all over the country. And it's all about white people saying, no, we want our kids to go to an all-white school. And Christianity, at least this particular form of kind of Jerry Falwell right-wing white nationalist Christianity, has overlaid itself with the racism that animated all that stuff. And now we've got what we've got, Rich.
Yeah, and I want you to remember what Bull Connor is known for having said. I've seen this little clip that's used in several different documentaries that I've noted. He's standing there in front of people and he says, you got to keep the races separated.
Yeah.
And then at the very same time, they're holding up placards that say mixed marriage is communism, and what they're doing is dividing and ruling. They don't.
Yep. No, it's absolutely, Rich. You're absolutely right. It's a divide and conquer strategy. Rich, thanks a lot for the call. Ellen Ratner's up next. Stick around. You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do. Ellen Ratner's new book, talkmedianews.com, is the website. And on the line with us is Ellen Ratner herself. Hey, Ellen, what's up?
Well, hi. First of all, Todd Miller wrote a book called Storming the Wall, in which he says, listen, Trump is bad. There's no question about it. But Clinton, Bush, and Obama have also been bad about trying to get immigration enforcement, and under them, basically, and under Trump, immigration enforcement has gone from $1.5 billion in '94 to $23 billion.
Yeah, this is mind-boggling.
That they forcibly, 2.5 million people were forcibly expelled during the just under the Obama administration.
Yeah. Ellen, have you ever had to get a work permit anywhere else in the world when you're traveling?
And no, I haven't, but I know it's not easy.
Yeah, I've done it twice. I've done it in Australia and I've done it in Germany. And it's a major project. And, you know, when Reagan stopped enforcing the law that said that if wealthy white employers hire people who are not citizens, the white employers go to jail. Reagan stopped enforcing that in '86. And no president has started enforcing it. And you know, Reagan did it because he wanted to break up the unions in the construction industry and the meatpacking industry, which he did. I mean, it worked.
He certainly did do it.
Yeah, but instead, I mean, even Democratic presidents have said, instead of cutting off basically the oxygen for immigration, which is not even an issue for the last 8 years, more people are leaving the country than coming in terms of immigrants. Now we've got a crisis with refugees, which is a completely separate thing. But on to the immigration issue, if instead of cutting off the oxygen by saying white employers are going to start going to jail, they're using this brute force method of we're going to go after the immigrants themselves. And that's expensive and it doesn't work. And I don't know when the Democratic Party is going to wake up to this and figure it out. We talked about this with Ro Khanna a couple of weeks ago, and he's like, yeah, this is the real issue.
Well, that's interesting. By the way, Jose Andres, who's a very famous chef and who, of course, fed the people in Puerto Rico after the hurricane there, said he wants Trump to visit the shelters at the border and says that there's no national emergency.
Yeah, amen. And Jose, his restaurants in D.C. are just wonderful. Some of my favorite places to eat. Anyhow, what else is going on in the world, Ellen?
Okay, well, the Democrats are trying to roll back part of the president's tax law, but no Democratic lawmakers voted for it. However, the question is they know they can't do it while the Senate is still run by the Republicans, but they're hoping that in 2020 the Senate will turn over to the Democrats or the White House will, and then they can lay the foundation for that. Also, the Daily Beast reports today that the Russian lawyer from the Trump Tower meeting she was indicted for money laundering, but having nothing to do with the supposed Trump case. She was indicted on something else. And so that is a very interesting.
Well, the one thing we don't know, Ellen, is if that does have to do with Trump, because at the very end of that indictment was this comment or statement or whatever that she was helping this company, this Russian company, which had stolen what, $230 million, as I recall.
A lot of money.
Right, they basically stole it from themselves, and the CEO of the company then basically wanted to launder that money into the United States so he would have access to it, and he did it by, quote, purchasing high-end Manhattan real estate, end quote. Now, who would you buy that from?
Well, that's a very good question. And actually, as you know, I own an apartment in New York City, and it's very interesting. The Russians are always trying to buy stuff.
Wow. Yeah. Well, this is, and apparently this is, so if the money laundering that is charged in this thing, if they were using it to buy Trump properties and Trump had any knowledge that he was on the receiving end of money laundered dollars, that could be a big liability for him.
Oh, that could be impeachable for sure.
Yeah. So what else is
okay. Now, it's interesting. Amendment number 4, which was voted on in Florida in November, basically allows former felons to vote. It's making over 1 million people eligible to vote. Now, people who have been convicted of sex crimes or murder are still not eligible to vote, but the question is whether it will make Florida blue or not. I tend to think it will because so many Republicans voted against it. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, this is a voter suppression law that goes back to Reconstruction, to Jim Crow.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? In Ohio, felons can vote. I know that because Bob Ney can vote. But in Florida, they couldn't vote until until this week.
Right.
Okay. Now, President Trump, as you know, made his Oval Office speech yesterday, and Meet the Press moderator Chuck Todd told Lester Holt, what was intriguing to me is how much it lacked any new information. And the fact is, he said he called it a formalized version of the stump speech.
Yeah, that's all it was. In
And-
fact, that's what I tweeted yesterday. He just gave the same speech he gave when he came down the elevator in Trump Towers. He kicked off his 2020 campaign, and the networks paid for it.
That's exactly. And then during Cuomo prime time, a Democratic Congressman, Luis Gutierrez, said that Trump was distracting. And he said he just wants to talk about the wall because the noose is tightening in the Mueller investigation. And I think that's very interesting. Of course, Rod Rosenstein is resigning when the new head gets whatever.
Mr. Barr is coming in, and he's going to run the show. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting stuff. Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen's new book, Loving What You Do. TalkMediaNews.com is the website. We'll be back with more of the program right after this news break at the top of the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Preece. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out on the polls, at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well. Only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier, he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor." Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about-face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig National Convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president. You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. Tip of the hat, greetings to our friends listening in New York City now on our newest affiliate, WBAI, 99.5 FM. Okay, in the first hour of our program, we had Congressman Pocan on, taking your calls for the entire hour. In our second hour, we were talking about Trump's essential racism. And in fact, this guy, well, actually, I went on this long rant about how his brazenness is one of the qualities associated with leadership. You see this in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You see this in Jack Kennedy. You see this in LBJ. You see this in FDR. The willingness to step forward and say, yes, this is what I believe in. This is what I'm going to do, regardless of the consequences. The problem is that in the case of Donald Trump, that brazenness is not tempered. He doesn't have the rest of the toolkit. It's not tempered by other personality characteristics that are necessary to moderate it so that brazenness doesn't just turn you into a bully or turn you into a high-functioning sociopath. He doesn't have morality. He doesn't have intelligence. He doesn't have curiosity. He doesn't have introspection. He doesn't have empathy, and he doesn't have foresight. He's lacking these foundational qualities of humanity for whatever reason. I don't want to try to psychoanalyze him here, but I mean, this is just obvious on its face. And the principal weapon that he has wielded, the principal tool that he has used since he first jumped into the race, which, by the way, wasn't actually jumping into the race. It was a PR stunt to get GE to pay him through NBC to pay him as much as they were paying Gwen Stefani. Go check out Michael Moore's documentary, Fahrenheit 11/9. I'm pretty sure it's now available for free on Netflix or Amazon or something. Somebody called the other day and said that they were watching it there. So check it out. I mean, he opens the movie with it. They expected to do the thing in Trump Tower and do 2 rallies, and that was going to be the end of it. And then he was going to say, "Okay, I'm out of here." And instead, he got hooked on the love of the adoration when he laid out his whole racist thing about, Mexicans are rapists and murderers. And then all the white racists came out and said, "Hey, you're our guy. We haven't heard talk like this since George Wallace died." Or since George Wallace got shot. I guess that was the point at which Wallace kind of backed away from many of his positions. But this is bizarre. And then you take that racism and put it on steroids. Donald Trump today, well, let me back up just a little bit. California is and has been since 2006, so for 12 years now, 13 years, California has been a majority minority state. White people are less than 50% of the population of California. So, and California has turned into a very blue state. Democrats basically run the whole state. In fact, Republicans lost, 8 or 9 seats in the last House elections there? So, there's all this stuff going on in California that Donald Trump doesn't really like. I mean, the state, if you want to build a new house in California under these new state codes and Gavin Newsom, pushing the new governor, pushing this stuff forward, you have to have solar panels on your roof. Elon Musk just rolled out Tesla solar panels. I mean, they've got this new company that's making, roofs for people. And a certain percentage of it is solar, and a certain percentage of it just keeps the, the fire off or the rain off or whatever. So Trump really doesn't like California. California is defying the fossil fuel oligarchs who are funding the Republican Party and Donald Trump. California is showing us that it is possible for people of different races and religions and people from different cultural backgrounds to not only live together, but prosper together. California is showing us that without partisan gerrymandering, using well-drawn districts, you can have actually a functioning democracy, small d democracy. Donald Trump just can't deal with this. So what did he do today? You'll recall back a few months ago when he was in Europe, he was at one of these, or maybe it was in Argentina, wherever it was. He was at one of these meetings of international leaders, and the president or prime minister of Denmark, as I recall, maybe it was Finland, made a comment to him that Donald Trump interpreted to me. He had said, "You have a lot of forests," or words to that effect, and this leader said to him in response, "Yeah, we manage our forests really well." And what that means, I mean, Louise and I used to own 400 acres in Vermont, and we had, a guy with a horse actually 2 horses, who manage the forest. He would, you go in and you take out the trees that are dying. You open up spaces where you've got slow-growing deciduous trees, oaks and beech and things like that. You take out the faster-growing pines around them so that they can get more light, so they can prosper. I mean, there's a process that you engage in to maintain a forest. And if you do that in Vermont, you get a 25% reduction in your property taxes. So forest management is important stuff. And by the way, most of the forests in California are federal land. And the federal government does practice some forest management. But somehow Trump got the idea that what forest management means is you rake the leaves. No, seriously, I'm not making this up. This is another one of the problems. When I said he's got brazenness, which is, a characteristic you find in, great leaders, but he's lacking foresight, empathy, introspection, morality, curiosity, but most importantly, intelligence. This guy does not have the intellect of an average 7th grader. So he thought that the prime minister or president of the Scandinavian country was telling him, oh, you don't want to have forest fires? Rake the leaves. So this morning, now California just suffered through some of the worst wildfires in not just California history, but in the history of the United States. Over 80 people dying in just one town. An entire town, Paradise, California, just burned to the ground. They are not just still suffering from this, and not just starting to put themselves back together, but they need to be planning for more of this, because this has been caused by global climate change. Another thing that Donald Trump denies happens because he wants to keep the money flowing from the billionaire oligarchs, the petro-billionaire oligarchs. So he tweets this morning that he's going to cut off the FEMA money to California if they don't start raking their damn leaves. Really? He says, unless they get their act together, which is unlikely, I have ordered FEMA to send no more money. It is a disgraceful situation in lives and money. This is bizarre. Here's the exact tweet. Billions of dollars are sent to the state of California for forest fires that, with proper forest management, would never happen. Unless they get their act together, which is unlikely, I've ordered FEMA to send no more money. It's a disgraceful situation in lives and money. Well, first of all, those are federal forest lands, in most cases, that we're burning. That's your property, Donald Trump. You should be having a conversation with your new director of the Department of Interior, which manages those federal forest lands. Oh, that's right. The guy's a lobbyist for the oil and gas industry. He doesn't know anything about forests, and he doesn't care anything about forests. He just is wondering if there's oil or gas under those forests so that he can privatize them. Gavin Newsom, who had just sworn in as governor in California, says, we've been put in office by the voters to get things done, not to play games with lives. And then he goes on to say, he says, disasters and recovery are no time for politics. I'm already taking action to modernize and manage our forests and emergency responses. The people of California, folks in paradise, should not be victims to partisan bickering. Amen. But this is what we've got in the White House right now. We have this man who has the one out of 15 or 20 characteristics that make a decent human being and a good politician, has this one characteristic of brazenness, and is lacking in every other dimension, and is putting not just our republic, but the entire world at risk. Check out arctic-news.blogspot.com if you want more detail on what I'm talking about in that context. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's coming up on 16 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day in just a moment. Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or you And welcome back. Sean just pointed out that Trump also, he's got a burr under his saddle right now about Nancy Pelosi, who represents San Francisco in California in the House of Representatives, and of course Chuck Schumer in New York State. But he's going specifically after California and probably after Nancy Pelosi in this case. Fred in Bremerton, Washington. Hey, Fred, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's on your mind today?
You talked earlier about the evangelicals, the whites in America, and how they seem to be following Trump's whistle.
Right. And how, actually, the big point that I wanted to make is that the white evangelical movement in the United States went from being a small fringe movement to a large major movement purely on the back, of offering white-only segregated Christian academies in the decade following Brown versus Board of Education in 1954.
Yes, I was living in Georgia and Alabama, Mississippi during the 70s. I was part of that. I participated in an evangelical uprising when Jeremiah Denton got elected to Congress. We put him in office, we being the evangelical church. They started to build that up during the 80s and into the 90s, and now look where they're at. Now, these are people who have tax-exempt status. They use their congregates to support the other congregates, donating their time and effort to the church. The church gets the tax-exempt, and they just keep feeding themselves.
Yes.
They become a rich little enclave, if you will. And all those evangelical churches are talking to one another, because I was part of that when I was living in Alabama. And I'm just saying that if his base is mostly the evangelicals, then these people aren't going to stop until we do have Armageddon, because they're already pushing the women's right issues. They want abortion issues off the table. They want to dissolve that whole issue with Planned Parenthood. Right. And they feel that they're going to get God's blessing on this country if they get rid of that. That's just one aspect of it.
Yeah, you raise a really important... I'm sorry, go ahead.
I really hope that there are other people listening that understand what is Trump's, what is his motive? What is the purpose of him being president?
I think it's, he ran for president, Fred, because he wanted to get a pay raise from NBC, and he thought he could intimidate them into it by threatening to go off and run for president. It didn't work. NBC didn't offer him the same amount of money as they were offering Gwen Stefani. And even though they were paid actors at his, $50 an hour paid actors at Trump Tower and during his first two rallies, during the two rallies, enough people who were not actors showed up, just good old yahoos, white guys with ball caps on, that suddenly he thought, wow, we could do something with this. And it was all a plan to expand his brand. This was all about making money. In fact, he came out and said it. He said, I'll probably be the first guy to run for president and make money doing so. It was all about greed, basically. And he was peddling racism in order to accomplish his greedy motives, just as he had been for the previous 8 years when he was claiming that Obama was born in Kenya. He has used race and racism, to successfully to make more profit for himself. That's what I think is going on.
How shallow the man is.
Pardon?
That shows you how shallow the man is. He doesn't belong in the highest position in this country. There's no, like you say, he is amoral.
Yeah.
He's all about himself, and he's a bully.
Yep. Amen.
And I hope and pray that more Americans will stand up against this, because this is a frog in a cold pot of water if we don't do something.
Yeah, and the pot of water is passing 100 degrees right now. Fred, thanks a lot for the call. Very, very well said. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Rudy in Riverdale, Georgia. Hey, Rudy, what's on your mind today?
Tom, you were real patient with this guy. When I heard him talk, this guy Nick from Louisiana, wherever he's from, I just got chills, man. I try to call that as a middle-aged black man and give you a different perspective without sounding like an angry black man. But Nick is part of the problem in this country, and
just for people who might have just tuned in, Rudy, let me just give them what you're talking about. In the last hour, about toward the bottom of the hour, about an hour ago now, a guy named Nick called in from New Orleans and basically said Trump is not a racist. Trump, the Central Park Five were actually probably guilty of the rape. You can't, and the fact that his father was in the Klan, so what? You have no evidence, blah, blah, blah. And he went through this whole thing. And I was of a mind of, I'm going to give him all the rope he needs to hang himself, and which I thought he did. It's a terrible metaphor to use in the context of race, but you understand what I'm saying, Rudy. And
I do.
Yeah, and so and a lot of people are calling in to say, hey, wait a minute, what do we do about this?
Well, I mean, we have to understand that this country was founded on racism. It's in the DNA of this country.
Right.
So let's take that. But see, this is where I try to call often, Tom, and try to speak a little sense. This is not helping this country from a social standpoint. Socially, Donald Trump, I feel, I'm just saying and I'm quite sure other people may feel the same way, but I really feel like this guy is really hurting white America from a social standpoint.
Yes.
And by white America not understanding race, not seeing the racism in themselves, everything that you do is built on relationships. Everything, from business to everything. So let's just take it from an economic standpoint. People will start thinking different about dealing with white people. I mean, it's just a natural thing. And only thing I'm saying, Tom, is white America have to understand that people of other groups are not just going to stand by and just allow this to happen over time. People don't forget this. This is a social issue.
Here's what I think is the good news, Rudy, and I'd love to get your take on this. It seems to me, and I might be totally wrong on this, but it seems to me that during the candidacy or during the presidency of Barack Obama, you had a relatively small number of white people basically rising up and making all kinds of racist remarks and things. I encountered this myself on a number of occasions. In fact, the book I've got about guns that's coming out in June opens with a story in a gun shop in Mason, Michigan, where the guy was yelling about our N-word president. But they started to become a little more visible, but they weren't really given a platform. And then came Trump as president, and he gave those folks a platform and elevated them. But what has happened, I think, in the last year and a half anyway, is that a lot of the white people who initially supported Trump because they thought that he was going to bring jobs home, they liked his trade policies, they believed that he was going to raise taxes on rich people because he said he would, he said it was going to cost him a fortune, that there were some policy things that he campaigned on that people wanted, that they thought were reasonable things. He said he was going to replace Obamacare with something that was cheaper and covers absolutely everybody and covers all pre-existing conditions. I mean, he basically just lied through his teeth and all these things. But those people who voted for him because they thought that he was actually the outsider who was going to shake things up, he was going to get rid of the lobbyists in D.C. and all this kind of stuff, they have figured out, A, that Trump lied to them on all those things, and B, that a lot of the people who are following Trump are these screaming racists. And I think that we're seeing an exodus out of the Republican Party as a result of that. And I think that when, at the end of the day, at the end of the Trump presidency, we're going to look back and say, okay, a lot of white racism in the United States that had been hidden and not discussed is now out in the open, and we're actually doing something about it. These people are being socially ostracized. When they make racist comments in supermarkets, somebody videotapes them and it goes viral and they get humiliated and they lose their jobs. There is a change happening in the white community that I think is a really good and healthy thing, Rudy. What do you think?
Well, yeah, and there's always going to be collateral damage, and that's what it's going to be. See, this is what needs to happen in this country. There are white people that are on the fence. I like black people, but I like Latinos, but I like Muslims, but we are humans. You have to understand that we are humans. And until you get the butt out of it and just take it for what it is, that we're human, then that's when we can start to grow as a human race.
Yeah.
And that's around the world. So all I'm saying as a black man in this country, white people as a whole need to understand that they were conditioned to be this way, and sometimes it's not their fault, but just to recognize it and to start making a conscious effort to watch and measure what they say, because these are relationships that was built. And when relationships are built, and as we go through this situation with Trump, people see things different. People are like, wow, I didn't know could my neighbor be thinking this way? Or you see what I'm saying?
That's my point. Yeah, that's my point. Is that you know, a lot of white people who are not fundamentally racist, although I think all of us you know, grew up with those stereotypes on television and in the movies and things. It's hard not to be contaminated by that. But I think a lot of white people are going, whoa, you know, this is living next door to me.
And this is what I'm saying. We just have to start. We have to be more conscious about where we are in this particular time, because this is just where we are in time.
Yeah, amen. Rudy, I got to run, but thank you. Very, very well said. And you know, stuff that we all need to be talking about and thinking about. You know, how do we bridge this? I think, frankly, I think that an awakening process is happening in the United States in reaction to Donald Trump, because he lifted the covers and let us see what was underneath all this stuff that's been, you know, just percolating there for years.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Our book today is From Slave Ship to Supermax, Mass Incarceration, Prisoner Abuse, and the New Neo-Slave Model by Patrick Elliott Alexander. This is Chapter 1. Talking in George Jackson's Shadow is the title, If Beale Street Could Talk. Prison preoccupied the literary imagination of James Baldwin. Yet his biographer David Leeming is one of the few to notice that prisons and prisoners were a significant part of Baldwin's own personal experience. Even the most cursory glance at Baldwin's published works and interviews bear out Leeming's important observation. In his essay Equal in Paris, 1955, Baldwin reveals that during his time in France, he was, quote, arrested as a receiver of stolen goods and spent 8 days in prison. While confined, Baldwin witnessed with great shock another incarcerated man's bleeding and wounding go unattended intentionally by prison staff. In his longer essay, No Name on the Street, 1972, Baldwin reflects on frequent prison visits that he made to his friend Tony Maynard, a black man who suffered violent treatment from guards after he was falsely accused with the murder of a white U.S. Marine. Baldwin's advocacy for black political prisoners in particular deeply informed his writings and public addresses throughout the 1970s and included actions such as aiding in the release of imprisoned Black Panther Party co-founders Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. In 1970, Baldwin was so outraged by the appearance of Angela Davis, the black revolutionary and advocate for political prisoners, in handcuffs and mock mugshot posture on the cover of Newsweek magazine, that he published an open letter to the New York Review of Books in which he deemed her jailing a continuation of slavery and a foreshadowing of a radicalized epidemic of mass incarceration at one and at the same time. Quote, only a handful of the millions of people in this vast place are unaware that the fate intended for you, Sister Angela, and for the numberless prisoners in our concentration camps, for that is what they are, is a fate which is about to engulf them too, end quote. When Baldwin spoke out about racism in the criminal justice system in the Dick Cavett Show in 1973, he won widespread admiration among imprisoned black communities, receiving, quote, so many letters from them that he determined to arrange a Christmas version of his musical drama, The Hallelujah Chorus, that would tour American prisons. Finally, in 1982, Baldwin published a letter in which he insisted that artists and prisoners have more in common with one another than have servants of the state. Baldwin was a stranger neither to witnessing nor to writing about prisons and prisoner abuse. Yet Baldwin's oeuvre had not been examined extensively in the context of his engagements with the literature and life experiences of imprisoned men and women. This chapter focuses on Baldwin's understanding of prisoner abuse and police intimidation as interrelated, radicalized social control functions of the contemporary U.S. carceral state, and pays careful attention to how his historicizing of radicalized state violence in fiction is shaped by his admiring engagement with the writings of imprisoned intellectuals. Baldwin, I contend, alludes to the human chattel conditioning, disciplinary violence, and economic exploitation that typified the institution of slavery in his Black liberation movement era short stories and novels to situate his Black working class characters' subjection to racial profiling, police brutality, wrongful incarceration, indefinite solitary confinement, prisoner abuse, and premature death in racialized historical context. Focusing mostly on Baldwin's novel If Beale Street Could Talk, 1974, this chapter explores how Baldwin, inspired by the narrative techniques of the imprisoned intellectual George Jackson, links a repressive logic of racial terror from the era of antebellum slavery with the state's practice of white supremacist social control into the contemporary criminal justice system. I argue that by incorporating Baldwin's conception of neo-slavery into the elusive framework for Beale Street, Baldwin elucidates the predictability, rather than the aberrant nature, of Black men's hypercriminalization, incarceration, and brutalization by the state. Beale Street thus exemplifies well what I theorized in the introduction as a neo-abolitionist novel. With this work, Baldwin becomes the first canonical African-American writer to construct a conceptual model of the prison-industrial complex in fiction that privileges the narrative viewpoint of its captives while also making apparent slavery's vestiges in the contemporary U.S. criminal justice system. My point of departure for this chapter is Baldwin's career-length consideration of racial terror as a state-sanctioned social control function of both pre- and post-slavery American life, and the relationship of this instrumentalist terror to Blacks' recurring encounters with state violence in the late 20th and 21st centuries. This contextualization establishes a broader framework within which my reading of criminalization and punishment in Beale Street might be understood. Baldwin's witnessing of the physical, psychological, and spiritual harm that the criminalized Black body endures at the hands of the state shows up prominently in his nonfiction works as well. In his book-length essay, No Name in the Street, for instance, Baldwin's assessment of wounds that prison guards inflict on his former driver and bodyguard, Tony Maynard, a wrongfully incarcerated Black man, is characteristically disturbing and damning. The book, From Slave Ship to Supermax. "34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Grandpa Mike over on Twitter. Not 1 cent for Trump's wall, he tweets. 5th century BC technology won't stop tunnels and ladders. And then he goes to the next step, which is so spot on. He says the so-called Great Wall of China did not keep out the Mongols. Hadrian's Wall did not stop the Picts. The walls of Jericho failed also. You can read that story in the Bible. And those walls bankrupted the states that built them. Yeah. Chris in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Chris, thanks for listening to 1350 AM. What's up?
Hey, Tom. So I wanted to just what I wanted to talk about was the subject of indifference, and I got to thinking about.
If I could just real quickly, Chris, because people tune in and tune out, to this program and all other radio shows constantly. So the basis for what you're saying is a call from the previous hour when somebody said that a caller said that her big problem with Donald Trump was his indifference to the plight of other people. And then I went off on a rant about how Bob McKee said that when you're writing, literature or screenplays or movies, the opposite of love is not hate. They're kind of mirror images of each other. The actual opposite of love is indifference. That being willing to just look away as the Jews are being slaughtered, for example, not because not out of hate, but just out of indifference. Back to you, Chris.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I was just thinking about the fact that, that I think that mode of thinking, indifference, that's what fueled, say, Hitler. And with Trump, he's been living under. It's like twofold. And what I mean by that is that, one, he was raised by a father that was indifferent as well, who didn't really see people as really factoring or having any value. Right. It's like people of color, they just don't matter. And I say twofold because with Trump, you know, I think about him sometimes, and you know, if you don't have money, there too you don't matter.
Yeah.
You know, but so I got to thinking, well, who actually could? We're in a really dangerous and interesting, you know, time right now. Who could really kind of get through to him, right? And it's troubling because he doesn't really respect people. He doesn't. Who does he respect? Now he is in a position to where he has to respect Nancy Pelosi, and you see that, right?
I think this is why he's threatening to pull the FEMA funding from California. He's pissed off at Nancy Pelosi for basically calling him out last night. He can't take on Chuck Schumer. New York, you know, is where he lives, but he's going to do everything he can to hurt California. He's also angry because California, you know, pushed Hillary Clinton way over the top, you know, in almost 3 million votes that you know won. You know, as Vicente Fox says, Donald Trump is the president of the Electoral College. Hillary Clinton is the president of the United States.
Right. You know, but you know where I was kind of going with that is that it's possible to maybe kind of get dialogue with him and to ask him, you know, how do you feel? Like, how do you feel about being lied to? Because he may not really acknowledge that, but the reality of it is that it's ingrained in him that it's profit over people.
Sure, and this is and Chris, he's happy to be lied to. He knows that the people around him, literally his whole entire life, hate him, fear him, or just want things from him. And they say all kinds of flattering, suck up things, and he just uses that. He takes everything he can from them, he sucks them dry, and he throws them away. He is fine with being lied to as long as the lies are, "Oh, Donald, thank you so much for the great honor of serving you. We love you. You're so brilliant." Chris, I got to move along, but thank you. I think your points are well made. Dana, Dana, I don't have a city for you. Where are you calling?
Chicago.
Oh, okay, great. What's up, Dana?
I'm just responding. I've listened to you for years, but I'm retired now. And this is the first time I've ever called you, but the gentleman, I would say that's very tongue-in-cheek, who ranted about the Central Park Five and that whole thing. I'm a criminal attorney. I was a public defender for 26 years at 26 in California in Chicago, the largest system there is in the country. DNA is an exclusion is the most reliable thing you can ever have.
Yeah, and that was what proved that the Central Park Five had nothing to do with that crime.
And I just had to say that he had no idea what he's talking about.
Yep.
And when he said, I looked at the evidence, oh yeah, I've done so many DNA cases. You know, I did murders, I did, you know, everything. And you get an exclusion, that's like 100% reliable.
Right.
It's the inclusions that aren't reliable.
Right. So in other words, if the evidence from the DNA test comes back that you definitely were not anywhere near that crime site, that's 100%. If the DNA evidence comes back and says, you know, you might have been at that crime site, that might be like 95%?
Oh, less than that.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Less than that.
Very interesting. Dana, thank you for sharing that with us.
Okay, I just had to say that. I was reading a book and I was about to throw it across the room and that guy started talking.
I get it.
But
Dana,
you handled him wonderfully.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dana. I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Bob in Waynesville, North Carolina. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Honored to speak with you, sir. And you're spot on your forest management explanation. I spent 30 years as college faculty teaching forest ecology and forest management. You know, managing our forests are critical, just like you'd manage a garden. You don't plant it and let it just lay there because you'll end up with weeds and dead things that will catch fire and just go bananas. We're facing a real problem because of climate change. We're allowing exotic species to be introduced into different forest types that are killing species right and left. There are 10 species in West North Carolina that were decimated in the years I've been teaching.
This is by the exotic species you're talking about are beetles or are things like kudzu?
Insects and diseases that will move into other forest types that would typically be controlled by
natural predators or extreme colds.
Right.
And we're not having that anymore. So these forests now are standing there with dead trees that are just ready to blow up.
Yep.
This is the time of year we'd be out in the West specifically removing those ladder fuels and those ground fuels, because this is when we could do controlled burns and mechanically get in there and take that fuel load out. And they're on furlough right now. They're not allowed to even be there.
Is that, you mean because of the government shutdown?
Exactly. The forests are Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Indian Affairs, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Those folks would be out there right now prepping and removing those fuels in anticipation of another fire season with droughts, and they're not able to do that. We're facing some devastating situations with our climate change that's creating these fire hazards, especially out west in those pyrophytic communities. Those forest types thrive on fire, periodic fire, only regenerate with fire opening zones, cleaning the forest floor for the seeds to germinate. So you start building homes within those communities, and now you're having extreme droughts because of climate change. You're asking for serious situations, but not only there, the trees here in Western North Carolina, we have standing trees that are just waiting to explode with a fire. When we had the situation of 4 or 5 years ago, we had a serious fire here in
and we got this same problem in Oregon too. And again, it's dead trees to a large extent.
Exactly, and it's got to be managed. It's got to be taken care of.
But that doesn't mean, Donald Trump thinks that means you go out with rakes and you rake up the leaves, and
No.
it doesn't mean that at all. And Bob, I got to move along, but spot on. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. I appreciate it. Elliot in Marshall, North Carolina. Hey, Elliot, what's up?
Hey, so you say Donald's not a racist. Where's the evidence?
Well, I didn't say he's not a racist. Nick says he's not a racist.
I'm just messing with you.
Okay.
I watch some, a lot of stuff on YouTube and stuff, and then I look at comments, and I just don't get it. It seems like there must be a bacteria that's eating the brains, because, the comment will be like, well, when did he lie? Somebody would say, well, he lies all the time. Well, when did he lie? And that's their whole thing. Or their comeback is somebody else, what about Hillary or what about Obama?
Yeah.
I don't understand. Have you looked at any kind of psychological explanations of how is this?
Yeah, actually, John Dean of Watergate fame wrote a book called Conservatives Without Conscience, which was based on a previous book by another guy called The Authoritarians, and who John Dean credits lavishly with his book. And what that guy wrote and what John Dean writes is that about 20% of us are actually authoritarians. That is, we really either, if we're authoritarian followers, we want an authority figure to tell us what to do. And about 95% of all authoritarians are authoritarian followers. And about 5% of authoritarians, which would be like 1% of the population, are authoritarian leaders. And they're the ones who speak to the authoritarian followers and say, I'm your guy, I alone can fix it. And that's what's going on. You're seeing an authoritarian leader in Trump, and that brazenness is the principal characteristic that attracts authoritarian followers. And then you're seeing the authoritarian followers who, in their own homes, may well be authoritarian leaders. In other words, they men who say that they have to be the head of household or that they have to beat their children. These are the kind of people who follow people like Donald Trump. And that psychological profile is well established, Elliot. This is not something new.
Well, I used to have a lot more hope. I was, I'm kind of a 60s, 70s character that came along and thought, we're all family, we're all brothers and sisters. We know that the people that want to get rich off everybody else are going to try to control us. We need to get information out and get people aware that that's what's happening, and then we can make it. We can deal with the problems that come along. But I've almost lost all hope in that.
My hope is actually way up right now compared to 2 years ago. When Trump started out, I was like, oh my God. But I'm seeing the white people who supported Trump now realizing that the core of his candidacy is racism, and those whites who are not racists are deserting him. And I think that that's a really good and healthy thing. So I'm actually, feeling pretty optimistic right now, Elliot. I think that this country is starting to make the turn. I mean, it's like turning a giant ship. Even after you turn the wheel, it's going to take a while before the ship actually completes the turn. Elliot, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Spot on. It's 46 minutes past the hour and change. We'll be back in just a moment with more of your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Trump goes out and lies last night, basically a whole bunch of racist lies, and now today he's saying, and we're going to cut FEMA money for California. Brilliant. And welcome back. Joe in Elyria, Ohio. Am I saying that right, Joe?
You are?
Hey, what's on your mind?
Basically, I'm sick of Trump, and I'm sick of the GOP, and I really do believe that their entire strategy with this racism and anti-Semitism is just a farce designed to bring people, the real racists, out of the woodwork and into the light. And I think that there's only one way that we as Democrats or we as a nation can overcome this insanity, and that is to use our First Amendment right, speak out, turn it up to 11, and vote like Democrats did in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and, vote like Republicans.
I agree with you, Joe, and that, not vote like Republicans policy-wise, but vote like Republicans, like consistently showing up at the polls every election. I absolutely agree with you, and I think that that's actually what's going on. I think that's why you've got 40 new members of Congress, and they're all Democrats.
The thing that is really disgusting, though, is that they take it so far that we end up with mass shootings, and it's almost like they don't care.
Who takes what so far?
It's a cost-benefit analysis.
Who takes what so far?
The Republicans, with their rhetoric, drive people up the wall so far to the point where we end up actually with mass shootings.
Yeah. I would not disagree with that. I mean, you go back and you look at Adam Lanza, the guy who shot up Newtown. He and his mother had been listening to, all the freak-out rhetoric from George W. Bush after 9/11. We got to be afraid of these Muslims. We got to torture them. We've got to kill them. We got to throw them in prison and ignore habeas corpus and the other laws. We can't be civilized people anymore. We've got to become brutal. And they were waiting for the Muslims to come and attack them. I mean, they were preppers, right? They were waiting for the end times. And that kind of rhetoric in a major political party leads to that kind of insanity. It just tripped off a couple of people who were mentally unstable to begin with. So, yeah, I think you're spot on, Joe. Well said. Thanks a lot for the call. Smanzi, how do you pronounce your name in Venice, California, listening on KPFK?
Indiana.
Okay. Hi. What's up?
Oh, my God. I've been waiting to talk to you for 2 hours. Anyway, so you talked about different things, but I'm still thinking that I should tell you what I think should happen. It would be nice if it happened. Is, we have the Wall Street Journal and Fox News that are, right-wing,
Murdoch owned, yeah,
by a right-wing guy and everything. And why doesn't the Democratic Party have its own media so that instead of crying that the regular media does not report, all the, policies or all the moves of the Democratic Party and everything, crying that NBC or CNN and, all the media, the corporate media does not report these things, or even the New York Times and, and others. Why don't we have our own, I'm from France, and we have tons of newspapers, and they all have, their political tendencies, and we know if we want to know what's happening, we know where to read something.
I think we have that, and it's evolving fairly quickly. Free Speech TV, the Progressive Channel on Sirius XM. There are radio stations around the country, progressive radio stations, Pacifica. We're on a whole bunch of.
Pacifica and all that. But I'm just saying it's so minimal when you think that there now is going to, have...
Well, that's because they've got billionaires who will fund media infrastructure, and we don't. I wrote an op-ed directed at Tom Steyer about 3 or 4 months ago when Clear Channel was for sale, saying if you really want to influence America, don't run for president. buy Clear Channel, and he had $1 billion, he could have done it. But I completely agree with you. Thank you. Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Back, and Jim in Hollywood, Maryland. Hey, Jim, I didn't know there was a Hollywood, Maryland. What's up?
Yes, it's right next door to California, Maryland.
Okay, seriously?
That's an actual state and an actual place here in Maryland.
Amazing.
I got a question. It basically deals with the shutdown as it is right now, and the outrage that is coming in towards President Trump. But I don't remember all of this outrage coming from the left side when President Obama shut it down to put health care into place.
Obama did not shut down the government, Jim. That was done by the Republicans in the House of Representatives. That was Paul Ryan.
It's the same principle. Whoever.
No, it's not the same principle. The government is not shut down right now because of Trump. The government is shut down right now because Mitch McConnell will not bring to a vote in the United States Senate the exact same legislation that in the previous legislative session just 2 months ago, the exact same legislation that passed unanimously to reopen the government and fully fund all those agencies. It passed unanimously in the United States Senate. They sent it to the House. Paul Ryan refused to have a vote on it. Paul Ryan leaves at the end of the year. Nancy Pelosi comes in. She says, okay, we're going to have a vote on that piece of legislation that the Senate passed unanimously that reopens the government. And the House passes it with 7 Republican votes and all the Democrats. And they send it back to the Senate. And if the Senate passed it with another unanimous vote, or even with 80 or 90 votes, then you would have in both the House and the Senate enough votes to override a presidential veto. Trump could veto it and say, no, I want the government closed. They could override his veto. So right now, the one guy who is keeping the government shut down is not Donald Trump, although Donald Trump is the one who's egging this all on and advocating for it. It's Mitch McConnell. And you know, you've got to understand how this works, Jim, and I think you've missed something here. Ben in Howell, New Jersey. Hey, Ben, what's up?
Hey, how are you? I just overheard you speaking about one payer system in the healthcare system, and I just wanted your take in regards to: do you actually believe that you can have a one payer system and have the tort system the way it is right now be viable? In other words, the physicians in this country, me being one, have to pay upwards of $100,000 a year just for malpractice insurance. I'm not saying that, you know, this country can't have a one-payer system, but I believe that it's almost impossible for physicians to be able to pay that type of premium and also accept the reimbursements for a single-payer system.
Well, I'm not sure how it's done in other countries, Ben, but and with regard to the tort system, and you have, but one of the things we do know is, like, for example, when Texas, this was almost 15 years ago, passed so-called tort reform, where the most that you can sue anybody, including your doctor, for even if your doctor just is totally incompetent and totally screws you up and leaves you maimed for the rest of your life, the most you can sue for is $250,000. And everybody said this is going to solve the problem. Now, of course, it wasn't actually doctors who were calling for that tort reform in Texas. It was big chemical companies, because the most you can sue them for is $250,000. It was big ag. It was the big industrial companies. It was the refineries that kept blowing up and killing people. And so now in Texas, you can't sue for more than $250,000 for any kind of tort, period, because of tort reform. And it did not lower insurance premiums. So the question I'd ask you, Ben, is there's 34 fully developed countries in the world. It's called the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD countries. We are one of them. 33 of those 34 OECD countries provide essentially free health insurance to everybody in their country. What is so unique about America that we can't do that?
Well, first of all, I don't think any of those countries will have these guys taking out maybe $750,000 to go to school. That's number one. Number two, the number of years to go to college, medical school, et cetera, is almost half. For example, in most countries, you can go from high school into medical school. In this country, you have to go to some sort of four-year college. That's loans. Then you have to go to medical school. And then you have to go from 5 to 7 years of residency.
Right.
I've gone,
So you're saying it's all the systemic stuff that the AMA has held up over the years to try to limit the number of doctors so that they could raise the price.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Ben, thanks for the call. It's an interesting topic, and it's a complex topic, but we're out of time. So anyhow, we can continue the conversation tomorrow. In the meantime, keep an eye on what's going on out there. I think that we're going to see some really big stuff coming down in the whole Trump-Russia stuff, and we're just seeing the early cracks on this with the Manafort leaks from yesterday. One of the biggest stories, frankly, of the day that really got short shrift today. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow, and don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. You can't just sit back and complain. You got to get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.